Hello. To loosely paraphrase Charles Dickens, it is truly the best of times and the worst of times. We have a vaccine while some states are grappling with a second wave of COVID. There are few things that we can still consider a constant. The last 8 years, the New Indian Express is, without a break, brought you the best conversations around India's education by bringing the biggest and the most powerful people in India to Chennai for the ThinkEdu Conclave, which is, we'd like to believe, India's largest and longest running education conclave. But we are not doing that this year. No, this year is different. But you know that already. We are doing it this way, virtually. But as Ben Parker fictitiously told Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And so we continue to ask questions to people in power, but we are doing it responsibly by making sure it's virtual and wearing masks when needed, and bringing these great conversations right to your mobile phones. So sit back, tune in, comment, and let those ideas flow. ThinkEdu is back.
Hello, welcome and namaskar. 8 years ago, we at the New Indian Express embarked on a journey. More than most people, we understood that the future of the country could only be shaped by harnessing the power of our young leaders and youth, using education as both sword and a shield. And so we decided that we needed to start a conversation with all the stakeholders. Powerful conversation that would lead to better policy, more accountability, better realization, and best education. All of which was aimed at Indianizing of Indian education for an Atmanirbhar Bharat, a best India for all of us. Today, we step into our 9th chapter. We do so with mixed emotions, with pride because we have hosted 8 epic editions with some of the most powerful people India has ever known. And the tinge of sorrow as well that the COVID has coerced us to carry this year's edition forward virtually only. We are missing all the young audiences. Think Education as a platform brings with it impressive numbers and erudite scholars, starting with 72 speakers across 13 sessions during our inaugural conclave in Chennai back in 2013. We reached a zenith by hosting a staggering 32 sessions in 2020. Our honor roll is even more impressive this time. From former presidents like the late Abdul Kalam to late Pranab Mukherjee to Chief Minister from Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Chhattisgarh and Union Territory of Delhi, Union Minister from across fields like Prakash Javadekar, Smriti Irani to parliamentarians from across party lines. Ghulam Nabi Azad, Supriya Sule, Shashi Tharoor to name the couple of them. The list is endless and I could spend hours talking about how much we have learned from our 428 speakers across 120 sessions. We have had former presidents, sitting ministers, veteran bureaucrats and educationists, and highly regarded thinkers and scholars. We have had conversations around academic excellence, indigenous research, and the future of storytelling. We have made headlines, we have sparked debates, and we have generated a couple of controversies as well. But we have always encouraged deep thinking, thoughtful action, and active debates. Now I will instead reflect on what we have in store for you this year. As do every year, we have brought to you engaging discussions and illuminating conversations about new ideas and fresh thinking from India's finest thinkers, scientists, businessmen, and storytellers. And all of it is to discuss the lessons we need for the new world, and make no mistake about it. That is precisely what it is, a new world, a world beyond this virus. A world where education will set us apart as Indians, as proud Indians, as prosperous Indians, as global citizen leaders. From artificial intelligence versus human mind, to the idea of India versus the identities of India, from the power of Sanskrit to the best of our epic traditions, from the possibilities of Indian research to the prevalence of anti-intellectualism. You will find in the sessions an echo and more of contemporary conversations and dialogues. Among our speakers are some of the world's best minds. From Union Minister Ramesh Pokhriyal to Nitin Gadkari to Infosys co-founder Chris Gopalakrishnan, best-selling author Amish Tripathi to the man who helmed Facebook and Amazon in India, we have an exciting array of speakers for you. I have no doubt that we will spark a debate and discussion with every session. Sow the seeds of change in young mind and spread hope for a better tomorrow. Stay safe, watch, think, act. Here is to a better tomorrow. We are counting on you. My gratitude to you and to Professor Vaidya Subramaniam of Shastra University for standing with us as partner during our journey of discovery. Debate, dissent, discussion is part of Indian tradition. We hope these survive and thrive in future as well. Now I invite Dr. Pokhriyal, our Union Education Minister, who has stirred the new education policy, which is going to start the process of Bhartiyakaran of our Indian education, to deliver his inaugural address. Welcome, Dr. Saab. Please, stage is yours.
मैं वरिष्ठ पत्रकार श्री प्रभु चावला जी और द न्यू इंडियन एक्सप्रेस ग्रुप को शिक्षा से जुड़े इस कॉन्क्लेव का आयोजन कर विद्यार्थियों में जागरूकता पैदा करने के लिए बहुत धन्यवाद देना चाहता हूँ। मुझे जहाँ तक पता है कि यह कॉन्क्लेव आप 2013 से लगातार आयोजित कर रहे हैं और इसमें भाग लेने वाले सभी प्रख्यात शिक्षाविद हैं, सभी अधिकारी वर्ग है, शिक्षा से जुड़े न केवल शिक्षक हैं बल्कि शिक्षाविद भी हैं और विभिन्न क्षेत्रों के लोग हैं जो भारतीय शिक्षा को सुदृढ़ और गुणवत्तापरक बनाने की दिशा में बेहद सकारात्मक चर्चा करते हैं। और मैं आज भी जो भारतीय शिक्षा को सुदृढ़ और गुणवत्तापरक बनाने की दिशा में जो लोग विचार विमर्श करने के लिए एकत्रित हुए हैं, मैं उन सभी लोगों का आभार प्रकट करता हूँ। मैं उनको शुभकामना भी आप सबको देना चाहता हूँ कि शिक्षा, क्योंकि किसी भी व्यक्ति का, किसी समाज का, किसी राष्ट्र का, किसी परिवार का आधारभूत स्तंभ है। इसको रीढ़ की हड्डी कहा जाता है और इस शिक्षा की गुणवत्ता को बनाने के लिए, बढ़ाने के लिए जो एक जुनून के साथ आप सब लोग जुटे हुए हैं, मैं आप सबका अभिनंदन करना चाहता हूँ। आप सबको मालूम है कि भारत की जो शिक्षा थी वो पूरे विश्व में अद्भुत थी हमेशा। यदि आप प्राचीन भारत को देखेंगे तो तक्षशिला, नालंदा और विक्रमशिला जैसे विश्वविद्यालय इस देश के अंदर थे और जहाँ पूरी दुनिया के लोग ज्ञान, विज्ञान, अनुसंधान, नवाचार, व्यवहार, आचार, संस्कार, जीवन मूल्य, दर्शन सब विषयों का अध्ययन करने के लिए मेरे हिंदुस्तान में आते थे, मेरे भारत में आते थे और यहाँ से शिक्षा ग्रहण करके वो वापस जाते थे। आप सबको मालूम है कि देश सैकड़ों वर्षों तक की गुलामी की थपेड़ों में रहा और जिसके कारण वो सारा हमारा जो विश्व गुरु भारत का जो ताकत थी वो उसको छीनने की कोशिश होती रही। लेकिन आज हम स्वाधीन हैं और मुझे ये कहते हुए खुशी होती है कि देश की आज़ादी के बाद बहुत आमूल चूल परिवर्तन के साथ देश के प्रधानमंत्री आदरणीय नरेंद्र मोदी जी के नेतृत्व में हम नई शिक्षा नीति 2020 को लेकर के आए हैं। भारत को आत्मनिर्भर बनाना और इसका भारतीयकरण करना, भारत को एक सूत्र में पिरोए रखना, जोड़ना, इसका गांव अंतिम छोर तक के छात्र से लेकर के और शिखर तक की शिक्षा, विश्व स्तर की शिक्षा और उसकी गुणवत्ता को बनाए रखना इस जो अभूतपूर्व परिवर्तन है उसका एक हिस्सा है। हम लोगों ने भारतीय भाषाओं को, जैसे कि आपको मालूम है कि ये जो नई शिक्षा नीति है वो तमाम परिवर्तनों को लेकर के आई है। और यदि देखेंगे तो 10+2 को हटाकर थकी और पिटी व्यवस्था को अब उसको एक तरफ करके अब 5+3+3+4 लाई हैं, और 5 को भी हमने 3+2 में जोड़ा है। 3 वर्ष प्री प्राइमरी में रहेगा, और आंगनबाड़ी में भी, क्योंकि 3 वर्ष से 6 वर्ष तक के बच्चे का जो मस्तिष्क का विकास है, हमारे वैज्ञानिकों ने, विशेषज्ञों ने कहा है, और यूनेस्को ने भी इस बात को बल दिया है कि 3 वर्ष से 6 वर्ष तक के बच्चे का जो मस्तिष्क का विकास है वो बस बहुत तेज़ी से होता है, और वो अवसर हम हाथ से नहीं जाने देना चाहते, ताकि उसको खेल खेल के माध्यम से किस तरीके से उसके अंदर की ऊर्जा को कैसे करके और विकसित किया जा सकता है। और आप यदि देखेंगे तो ये आमूलचूल परिवर्तन के साथ जो 6वीं से ही वोकेशनल एजुकेशन दे रहे हैं, वो भी इंटर्नशिप के साथ दे रहे हैं, जहाँ अंक ज्ञान और अक्षर ज्ञान होगा। वहीं शिक्षणेतर गतिविधियाँ, जिसमें सांस्कृतिक कार्यक्रमों से लेकर संस्कृति, सभ्यता, परंपराओं के जुड़ाव से लेकर के खेल और योग, उसके साथ साथ जो तीसरा बहुत महत्वपूर्ण विषय है वो है उसका कि वो वोकेशनल अंक ज्ञान, अक्षर ज्ञान, शिक्षणेतर गतिविधियाँ और वोकेशनल एजुकेशन, वो भी इंटर्नशिप के साथ, ताकि वो व्यावहारिक रूप में अपनी जो प्रतिभा है उसका वो विकास कर सके, उसके अंदर जो शक्तियाँ हैं वो शक्ति बाहर निकल करके एक दिशा पा सके। और स्कूली शिक्षा से ही आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस को लाना, ये भी दुनिया का पहला ऐसा उदाहरण होगा जो स्कूली शिक्षा से आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस को पढ़ाएगा। मूल्यांकन का भी टोटली तरीका बदल दिया इस शिक्षा नीति ने। अब ये जो रिटर्न तो जो पहल थी वो अब ऐसा नहीं, परिणामों पर आधारित ये शिक्षा होगी, बिल्कुल अलग प्रकार से इसका मूल्यांकन होगा। और मूल्यांकन भी किस तरीके से होगा कि बच्चा अपना स्वयं का भी मूल्यांकन करेगा, वो अपने को अपने नंबर देगा कि वो अपने को किस योग्य पाता है, उसको कितने नंबर अपने को देनी है। स्वाभाविक कि आप जान सकते हैं कि किसी भी व्यक्ति को, किसी इंसान को अपने बारे में ज़्यादा पता होता है, वो अपनी कमियों को ज़्यादा देखता समझ सकता है। और जिस दिन उसने ये कमियों को समझ करके ये देखना शुरू किया कि उसको अपनी कमियों या अच्छाइयों के पर नंबर भी देना सुनिश्चित करना है, तो वो अपना मूल्यांकन स्वयं करेगा। तो वो स्वयं भी मूल्यांकन करेगा, उसके अध्यापक भी मूल्यांकन करेंगे, इतना ही नहीं तो उसका अभिभावक भी मूल्यांकन करेगा कि हाँ, जो उसका बच्चा है वो यदि उसको नंबर देनी है तो कितने में से कितने नंबर वो उसके लिए देगा। वो भी अपने बच्चे को कमज़ोर नहीं देखना चाहेगा, उसकी तैयारी करेगा और उसको अच्छे से नंबर जो मूल्यांकन है अपने सही आंकलन करेगा, क्योंकि उसको पता है कि अध्यापक भी उसका मूल्यांकन करेगा और स्वयं बच्चा भी मूल्यांकन कर रहा है। जितना ही नहीं तो उसका बगल में बैठे रहने वाला साथी भी उसका मूल्यांकन करेगा। तो साथी जब मूल्यांकन करेगा तो स्वाभाविक ही है कि बच्चा अपने साथी को भी जो उसके अंदर है ज्ञान, उस ज्ञान को उसके साथ बांटने की कोशिश करेगा, क्योंकि उसको मालूम है कि मैं उसको अवगत नहीं कराऊंगा तो ये मेरे को कम नंबर देगा। उससे संबंध भी बना करके रखेगा, जहाँ संबंधों को उसको मालूम है कि इससे संबंध नहीं बिगाड़ने हैं, और ये भी मालूम है कि उसके साथ ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा संवाद भी करना है, ताकि उसको मेरी योग्यता के बारे में जानकारी हो और वो मेरे को अच्छे नंबर दे। तो ये 360 डिग्री होलिस्टिक मूल्यांकन उसका होगा। तो मूल्यांकन भी उसको रिजल्ट कार्ड नहीं मिलेगा, उसका प्रोग्रेस कार्ड मिलेगा। क्या प्रोग्रेस की उसने, क्या प्रगति की उसने। तो इस आमूलचूल परिवर्तन के साथ हम इसको ला रहे हैं, और वोकेशनल जो एजुकेशन है वो तो बच्चों को 10वीं तक 12वीं तक जाते जाते वो ऐसा आत्मनिर्भर तरीके से उसको खड़ा कर देगा कि किसी भी बच्चे को इंटर करने के बाद कहीं भटकने की ज़रूरत नहीं होगी। उसकी आधारशिला इतना है कि वो कुछ भी कर सकता है, जो उसके आसपास जो उसने कौशल उसका विकसित हुआ है उसको आगे बढ़ा सकता है। और उच्च शिक्षा में भी आप आएंगे तो कोई भी विषय ले सकते हैं, किसी भी विषय के साथ कोई भी विषय ले सकते हैं। अब ये विषयों का जो है जिस तरीके से बंधन था, इन बंधनों को तोड़ दिया गया है, बिल्कुल पूरा मैदान खाली कर दिया है। इसलिए छात्र छात्राएं भी बहुत खुश हैं कि हाँ, जो विषय उनका अपना हृदय के निकट है, अपने मन के निकट है, उस विषय को आगे बढ़ाएंगे। और अब वो सामान्य तय जो थोपी हुई व्यवस्था थी उससे वो मुक्त हो जाएगा। किसी भी विषय के साथ किसी भी विषय को ले सकता है। वो इंजीनियरिंग के साथ वो साहित्य ले सकता है, वो गणित के साथ संगीत ले सकता है, कुछ भी जो उसको चाहिए, जो उसमें जिसमें प्रगति करने की उसकी क्षमता है उस विषय को लेकर। लेकिन यदि कोई विषय उसने लिया और बीच में उसको लगता है कि नहीं, अब इस विषय को उसको नहीं संभव है, या परिस्थितिवश वो एक साल में छोड़ करके कई बार जाना पड़ता है, तो उसको एक साल का भी सम्मान मिलेगा। वो हताश और निराश नहीं होगा। एक साल में उसको सर्टिफिकेट मिल जाएगा। और यदि 2 वर्ष में छोड़ के जाता है तो उसको डिप्लोमा मिल जाएगा, तब भी निराश होने की ज़रूरत नहीं है। और 3 साल में उसको डिग्री मिलेगी। लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि यदि वो कई बार परिस्थितियाँ होती हैं, कठिनाई होती है, छोड़ने के लिए छात्र छात्रा विवश होते हैं, लेकिन उसके बाद यदि उसको लग रहा है कि नहीं, वो अब जहाँ मैंने छोड़ा था वहाँ से मुझे अब अपने करियर को और आगे बढ़ाना है, तो वो आ सकता है और जहाँ उसने छोड़ा है वहीं से वो शुरू कर सकता है। जो एकेडमिक बैंक ऑफ क्रेडिट बना रहे हैं, वो क्रेडिट का जो बैंक होगा उसकी चाबी उसके हाथ में होगी। जहाँ उसने छोड़ा था वहीं से वो अपने अध्ययन आगे कर सकता है, जब चाहे आ सकता है, उसको कोई रोक टोक नहीं होगी। इस आमूलचूल परिवर्तन के साथ आ रहे हैं। और इस शोध की संस्कृति अभी तक क्या था, हम लोग को पैकेज की होड़ में थे, और इसीलिए जो हमारे देश की प्रतिभा थी सब पलायन कर रही थी। उनको लगता था ये पैकेज बड़ा हो गया तो बस वो फिर अपनी उसी होड़ में लग जाता था। लेकिन अब पेटेंट की होड़ लगेगी, क्योंकि जब हम अपनी चीज़ हमारे पास है, हम शोध और अनुसंधान करेंगे। और इसी पर जब मैं समीक्षा करता हूँ तो अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर अभी हम शोध और अनुसंधान के अभाव के कारण, कुछ कमियों के कारण वो अंतर्राष्ट्रीय प्रतिस्पर्धा पर नहीं जा पाते। हालांकि मुझे इस बात को कहते हुए खुशी है कि पूरी दुनिया के 40,000 विश्वविद्यालयों में अभी पीछे के कुछ दिन पहले की उस ने जब अपनी रैंकिंग को घोषित किया तो हमारे जो संस्थाएं हैं प्रथम 100 में पहली बार 12 संस्थाएं विषयवार में प्रथम 100 में आई हैं, दुनिया में अपना स्थान बनाया। और हम तेजी से आगे बढ़ रहे हैं। और इसीलिए नेशनल रिसर्च फाउंडेशन में 50,000 करोड़ रुपया 5 वर्ष में केवल शोध और अनुसंधान को मिलेगा, क्योंकि हम इस शिक्षा नीति के तहत टैलेंट को भी ढूंढेंगे, उसका विकास भी करेंगे, उसका विस्तार भी करेंगे। लेकिन इस टैलेंट के साथ हम उत्कृष्ट कोटि का कंटेंट भी देंगे। टैलेंट तो है, लेकिन उत्कृष्ट कोटि का यदि कंटेंट उसके साथ नहीं है तो वो टैलेंट बेकार हो जाएगा। तो उत्कृष्ट कोटि का कंटेंट उस टैलेंट के साथ जोड़ेंगे, और टैलेंट और कंटेंट दोनों मिल करके नए पेटेंट को पैदा करेंगे। उस दिन भारत आत्मनिर्भर भारत होगा। और जो मेरे देश के प्रधानमंत्री 21वीं सदी का स्वर्णिम भारत की बात करते हैं, और जो भारत मेक इन इंडिया, डिजिटल इंडिया, स्किल इंडिया, स्टार्टअप और स्टैंडअप पोस्ट करके गुजरेगा और $5 ट्रिलियन की अर्थव्यवस्था की दिशा में आगे कदम बढ़ाएगा, उसकी आधारशिला है ये नई शिक्षा नीति। और इसलिए ये जो नई शिक्षा नीति है वो नेशनल भी है, ये इंटरनेशनल भी है, ये इम्पैक्टफुल भी है, ये इंटरेक्टिव भी है, ये इनोवेटिव भी है, तो ये इंक्लूसिव भी है। यदि इसकी खूबसूरती को देखेंगे तो सब पूरी देश नहीं पूरी दुनिया उसका उत्सव मना रही है, खुशियाँ मना रही है, और सोच रही है कि पहली बार ऐसी शिक्षा नीति आ रही है जो मानव को मानव भी बनाएगी और उसकी शिखरता तक भी उसको ले जाएगी। वो चाहे ज्ञान हो, विज्ञान हो, अनुसंधान हो, नवाचार हो, और तकनीकी के क्षेत्र में भी नेशनल एजुकेशन टेक्नोलॉजी फोरम का गठन कर रहे हैं, जो अंतिम छोर के व्यक्ति को तकनीकी ज्ञान हासिल कराएगी और उसकी तकनीकी को और बढ़ा करके उसको जो वोकल फॉर लोकल है वो लोकल फॉर ग्लोबल तक जा सकेगी, अंतर्राष्ट्रीय करण तक जा सकेगी। यही इसका रास्ता है। और इसलिए वोकेशनल एजुकेशन, जो उसके कौशल का विकास करना और उसके बाद उसको स्टार्टअप तक भेजना और स्टार्टअप से मेक इन इंडिया तक पहुंचाना, यह उसका रास्ता है। और इसलिए मुझे लगता है कि हम मातृभाषा में प्रारंभिक शिक्षा अपनी मातृभाषा में लाए हैं, क्योंकि सभी वैज्ञानिकों का, विशेषज्ञों का है कि जो अपनी अभिव्यक्ति अपनी मातृभाषा में हो सकती है वो किसी सीखी हुई भाषा, थोपी हुई भाषा में नहीं हो सकती। और इसीलिए ये प्रारंभिक शिक्षा हम अपनी मातृभाषा में लेकर आ रहे हैं। ये भी मेरे लिए बहुत खुशी का विषय है, संतोष का विषय भी है कि पूरे देश ने इसको बहुत अच्छा माना है कि पहली बार ऐसा हो रहा है जब अपनी मातृभाषा में छात्र पढ़ेगा और अपनी प्रतिभा का प्रदर्शन करेगा। और जो हमारे संविधान में प्रदत्त हमारे अनुसूची 8 में 22 भारतीय भाषाएं हैं, जिसमें तमिल, तेलुगु, मलयालम, कन्नड़, गुजराती, मराठी, बंगाली, उड़िया, असमिया, उर्दू, संस्कृत, हिंदी, तो ये लगभग 22 भारतीय भाषाएं हैं। अद्भुत क्षमता है इनमें, ज्ञान है, विज्ञान है, नवाचार है, इसमें आचार है, व्यवहार है, इसमें संस्कार है, इसमें जीवन मूल्य भी हैं। और ऐसी परंपराएं हैं जिन परंपराओं के आधार पर हम पूरे विश्व में अपना एक अलग सा स्थान हमने बनाया है। तो इसलिए वैसे भी आपने देखा होगा कि ये विश्व गुरु भारत, ये इसने हमेशा सभी पूरी दुनिया की चिंता की है। वसुधैव कुटुम्बकम की भावना को लेकर के हम हमेशा चले हैं। और सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामया की नई धरती पर एक भी प्राणी दुखी होगा तब तक मैं सुख का एहसास नहीं कर सकता। मैं इतना पुरुषार्थ करूंगा कि मैं खुशियों को बांटूं, सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः की से लेकर के, और सैना भवतु सैनो भुनक्तु सैवीर्यम, नहीं, साथ साथ चलेंगे, साथ साथ खाएंगे, साथ साथ पुरुषार्थ करेंगे। हम सबको साथ लेकर के चलना चाहते हैं। और असतो मा सदगमय तक की हमारी यात्रा है कि नहीं, असत्य पर विजय प्राप्त करके सत्य की ओर लेकर के जाएंगे। और तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमया, तमस को, जो ये अंधेरा है, इसको हम चीर करके नई रोशनी को ला करके आगे बढ़ाएंगे। तो ये जो इच्छा शक्ति है वो इस नई शिक्षा नीति में समाहित है। ये जीवन मूल्यों की आधारशिला पर खड़े होकर के और शिखर तक की शिक्षा देने के लिए ललक रखती है। तो मुझे भरोसा है कि जो आपकी जो ये अभियान है आपका, ये जो आप कॉन्क्लेव मनाते हैं, निश्चित रूप में नई शिक्षा नीति आपकी आशाओं पर, अपेक्षाओं पर न केवल खरी उतरेगी, बल्कि एक नए भारत के निर्माण की दिशा में ये आधारशिला बन करके मजबूती के साथ पूरे विश्व के फलक पर हिंदुस्तान का माथा ऊंचा करेगी, हिंदुस्तान को ज्ञान की महाशक्ति भी बनाएगी। और मैं ये समझता हूँ कि जिस तरीके की नई शिक्षा नीति हम लेकर के आए हैं, उसका पहला रास्ता इस कोविड काल को पूरी दुनिया में जाना जाएगा। ये जो 2020 का जो वर्ष गया है, उसको एक तो कोविड के कारण जाना जाएगा और दूसरे में नई शिक्षा नीति 2020 के कारण भी जाना जाएगा। कोविड के ही दौरान हम इस नई शिक्षा नीति को भी लेकर के आई है। और आपने देखा है जब देश के प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी ने कहा कि चुनौतियों का कैसे, ये बड़ी चुनौती है, पूरी दुनिया जब कोविड के महासंकट से होकर के गुजर रही थी, पूरी दुनिया ठहर सी गई थी, और तब दुनिया की आंखें हिंदुस्तान की ओर थी, क्योंकि हिंदुस्तान दुनिया का सबसे बड़ा लोकतांत्रिक देश है। और यदि इसकी शिक्षा के वैभव को देखा जाए तो 1000 से अधिक यहाँ विश्वविद्यालय हैं और 45,000 से अधिक डिग्री कॉलेज हैं। यहाँ अध्यापकों की संख्या 1,09,10,00,000 से भी अधिक है। 1,10,00,000 अध्यापक, कई दुनिया के देशों की कुल आबादी इतनी ही नहीं है। और स्कूली शिक्षा को देखेंगे तो 15 लाख से भी अधिक स्कूल हैं हमारे पास। और यदि कुल छात्र छात्राओं की जनसंख्या देखें तो दुनिया के तमाम दर्जनों देशों के बराबर अकेले छात्र संख्या है, बल्कि अमेरिका की आबादी से भी अधिक 33 करोड़ छात्र और छात्राएं इस देश के अंदर है। युवा देश है आगे बहुत 30-35 वर्षों तक ये यंग इंडिया रहने वाला है। और इसलिए मैं ये समझता हूँ कि जो ये नई शिक्षा नीति है, इस शिक्षा नीति ने ये जो चुनौती भरे क्षण थे जब पूरी दुनिया संकट से गुजर रही थी, तब हमारे जो छात्र छात्राएं मेरे देश के प्रधानमंत्री के आह्वान पर कि इन चुनौतियों का कैसे मुकाबला हो सकता है, ताकत के साथ इन परिस्थितियों का मुकाबला किया था और उन चुनौतियों को अवसर में तब्दील कर दिया था। किसी को शायद पता भी नहीं होगा, जब लोग घरों में कैद थे तब मेरे IIT, मेरे विश्वविद्यालय, मेरे आईसर, मेरे IIM तमाम संस्थानों के छात्र शोध और अनुसंधान की प्रयोगशालाओं में मेरे अध्यापकगण थे। अध्यापकों ने भी एक योद्धा की भूमिका को निभाया है। अन्यथा आपको लगता है कि 33 करोड़ छात्र छात्र घरों पर कैद हो जाए, और ऑनलाइन दुनिया का सबसे बड़ा उदाहरण होगा कि हमने घरों को ही स्कूलों में तब्दील कर दिया। घर ही कि नहीं तो किसी अभिभावक शायद सोच भी नहीं सकता था कि उसका बच्चा घर पर ही पढ़ना शुरू कर देगा। ये भारत की ताकत है, मेरे देश के प्रधानमंत्री की प्रेरणा है कि हम 33 करोड़ छात्र छात्राओं को लगभग सबको हम ऑनलाइन पढ़ रहे। जो ऑनलाइन पर नहीं आ सकते थे उनको विभिन्न तरीक़ों से, रेडियो के माध्यम से, विभिन्न माध्यमों से हमने उस तक भी क्या वर्ष खराब नहीं जाने दिया, जबकि दुनिया के विकसित देशों ने अपने को पीछे कर दिया हो, एक साल पीछे कर दिया हो, तब हमने अपने देश के छात्र का एक वर्ष खराब नहीं होने दिया, व्यर्थ नहीं जाने दिया। और पूरी दुनिया ने इसको देखा। JEE नीट की जो कोरोना काल की दुनिया की सबसे बड़ी परीक्षाओं को कराने में हम सफल रहे हैं। तो ये जो नई शिक्षा नीति आई है वो इन चुनौतियों का मुकाबला करने के लिए आई है। तभी तो हमारे छात्रों ने वेंटिलेटर बनाए। देश में वेंटिलेटर की कितनी कमी थी, हमारी टेस्टिंग किट बनाई, ड्रोन बनाए, मास्क बनाई, और न केवल अपने देश में आपूर्ति की बल्कि दुनिया तक भी हमारी चीज़ें गई हैं। हमारे देश के प्रधानमंत्री ने वसुधैव कुटुंबकम की भावना को प्रतिपादित किया है, बताया है दुनिया को कि लो, यदि तुम संकट में हो तो हम आपकी मदद के लिए खड़े हैं। मैं इस अवसर पर आप सबका मैं धन्यवाद देना चाहता हूँ, बधाई देना चाहता हूँ, और जो आप लगातार इस दिशा में प्रयासरत हैं गुणवत्ता को बनाए रखने के लिए और भारत की शिक्षा व्यवस्था को और सुदृढ़ करने के लिए जो आप ये लगातार कॉन्क्लेव करते हैं, मैं आपका भी अभिनंदन करता हूँ। और मुझे भरोसा है कि भारत ज्ञान की महाशक्ति के रूप में जिस तरीके से उभर रहा है वो दिन दूर नहीं जब पूरे विश्व में भारत जो हमारा भारत था, जो जिसको विश्व गुरु के रूप में देखा जाता था, जाना जाता था, पहचाना जाता था, वो भारत फिर उस अपनी गरिमा को पाएगा और पूरे विश्व में विश्व गुरु के रूप में ज्ञान, विज्ञान, अनुसंधान और नवाचार की दिशा में मार्गदर्शन देगा, अपना योगदान देगा। आप सबको एक बार में मेरा अभिनंदन, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, नमस्कार।
We hope you really enjoyed that session. You can find the entire schedule of ThinkEdu 2021 on our website eventexpress.com. You can watch the rest of the sessions on our YouTube channel, eventexpress.com, newindianexpress.com and edxlive.com. You can also check out our Facebook and Twitter handles. Thank you for watching. is a new India? What does it require? What does it mean? And how do we build it from ground up? Let us hear it from the former Water Secretary and Sanitation Specialist Parameshwaran Iyer and former Chief Election Commissioner and a member of the International Elections Advisory Council, S.Y. Qureshi. They're going to talk to author and senior journalist Kaveri Bamzai.
Mr. Qureshi, may I ask you, really, what is at the core of being an IAS officer in India? What is the most fundamental thing that an IAS officer in India has to know?
You know, IAS is a very unique institution for which we should thank Sardar Patel as much as we can because he realized its vision and its importance. And there are various things which are unique about it. Number one, it is an all India service like the IPS and the Indian Forest Service, which means a service which is common to the entire country. For a country like India, a federal country, this was extremely important. Like, take the case of Parameshwaran Iyer himself. He is from Tamil Nadu, but at the age of 21, he moved to UP, forgot about his Tamil language, he picked up Hindi, and he spent next 40, 50 years in UP. It could have been in Punjab, it could have been in Nagaland. It's not a small sacrifice. Now, people are allotted to different states, and which is what is keeping the country united. If you see what happened, the happenings in Assam in the 80s, in Punjab, in Kashmir, it is the outsiders. You know, the inside officers may still get influenced or pressurized. It is the outsiders who keep the flag of India flying. One should never undervalue that. Secondly, you know, when I was preparing for the IAS and about to join service, we still had the same debate, technocrat versus generalist. Now, I think it is a myth, it is a misnomer. We are technocrats. We are a specialist. We are a specialist of public administration. Now, MBA is the specialist for private sector. We are a specialist to manage the public sector. And we get 2 years of intensive training, mind you. It is not just that through an exam we suddenly become experts of all. Thirdly, the fact that we come from a cross-section, now even engineers, doctors, IT professionals, everybody, they're all coming, and then they're given training to run the administration, particularly the district. Now, unlike any other post where nobody wants to go to the backward area, this is the biggest pleasure of an IAS officer to be posted to the most backward district in the country, because that is something which he tries to change the face of, and he will talk about it for the rest of his or her life. So, and finally, I would say that another uniqueness of the IAS is we never go stale, because every 2, 3 years, 5 years, or even 6 months, if we take UP, we are on a new job. And we have to learn the new job, and with the result, we never go stale. And obviously, if you are head of a department of agriculture, animal husbandry, and then to IT, and then third day to industry, you cannot remain ignorant. You have to lead from the front. So you have to pick up the job very quickly, which is what we all do, which is what keeps us all thriving and kicking, because we are always learning. We are always learning.
Right. Mr. Iyer, I'll come to you because there's a very interesting idea that Mr. Qureshi said, you know, the debate of the technocrat versus the generalist. In your book, you talk about choosing to stay on in, in UP and in Lucknow in particular, because you got so involved in the Swachh program. And later that really became your specialization. And we all know that you were able to effect a remarkable behavioral change in the Swachh Bharat mission. So talk a little about that decision. I found that very intriguing. As a young person in UP, you discovered this passion for sanitation and water when it wasn't even fashionable. Talk about that.
Sure. No, thanks, Kaveri. And, as Dr. Qureshi has said, I think there's no question that, and I fully agree with him, that the specialization of IAS officers is actually general administration, district administration, development administration, because that's what we do for the first 10, 15 years of our career. And I think we have serious comparative advantage in that. Now, so that happened to me as well. And as you've read the book, you'll see I kind of stumbled into a specialization. That's the way I put it, because I was transferred from Bijnor Again, I was there for a year, and I was removed. I thought I was doing well. I was a little disappointed to be posted to Lucknow, and then I was posted to rural development, which in UP is not the most glamorous of departments. You'd rather be in finance or in a sort of industries or better department. So when I went there, I was suddenly given this portfolio of rural water and sanitation. There was a World Bank project starting to be developed, and my boss, Mr. Harish Gupta, one of the most outstanding officers in UP, and I think a batchmate of Dr. Qureshi, who had given me that portfolio. So I initially thought, what is water and sanitation? Doesn't sound very exciting. And then as we started developing this program jointly with the World Bank, I realized it was a fascinating field and sector. This is about community empowerment, giving women leadership roles. And I got really interested in this Swachh program, which we developed. This was in the mid 90s. And then I realized that, this is where I can contribute a lot, use all my earlier field experience to really make an impact. And in fact, as I've written in the book, I was given the opportunity to go as district magistrate of a Kawal town, as we call it in UP, one of the big five.
Right.
And my wife had just got posted to Lucknow as Assistant Commissioner of Income Tax. And I was really interested in this sector. So I just decided to stay on. And since it wasn't much in demand, there was no push factor to get me out. I stayed on, and I really sort of developed, a very, very sort of good understanding, but fascination with the sector of both water and sanitation. So that's how I got into it. But as I've also said in the book, and so I've got not a different take, but I feel that with Dr. Qureshi, but I feel that after 10 to 15 years of service, I think it is useful for young IAS officers who have got a particular preference or experience with a particular sector or depth of knowledge is to start thinking about a broad area of expertise, whether it's a social sector, whether it's industries or economic management or regulation. I think that in today's world, it's probably useful to have a little more domain knowledge than we traditionally have. I mean, there are so many IAS officers, for example, Dr. Qureshi himself, he's one of the foremost election management experts in the world.
Exactly.
Right? And apart from the other things he's done. So I think that, it's whether it's by, typically in my case, it happened by accident, but I think increasingly the government, and I know the academy is doing this as well, including the Department of Personnel, I think they're starting to think towards getting people who are interested in particular sectors to start specializing, if that's the right word, or spending a little more time in a particular broad area. So that's what I feel. And it happened to me, and that's how I got into water and sanitation.
Yeah, and you've done remarkably well, as we know. Dr. Qureshi, may I come back to you and ask about the whole idea of the DM? How important is the DM? Mr. Iyer writes very well about, being DM of Bijnor and all the challenges that he had to face. And also then later discovering that these DMs were key to the Swachh Bharat program because they were the people on the ground and they had to be first evangelized in a way before he could actually reach out to, people in the villages. How important is the DM and how important are those years for a young IAS officer?
No, DM undoubtedly is the backbone of Indian administration. For the simple reason that in the district, everything under the sun comes under the charge of the DM. Now, of course, since there are so many subjects and we have our individual preferences, I opted for focus on education, for instance. There are people who focus on industry, the Param focus on sanitation. So there are so many areas to focus on. Not that you have to neglect all other sectors. You have to contribute everywhere, everything which is assigned to you, you have to fulfill. On top of that, you have to do something additional. And so much so that, in fact, I remember one of my seniors and idols in civil service, Mr. S.K. Misra. He said, look, the government will take work out of you. And you claim to be blue-blooded IAS officers and brilliant people. Unless you leave a mark, leave a legacy on the job, you're not fit to be called an IAS. Therefore, it has been my belief and my practice that I should leave any chair, any post better than I had found it. And this is besides doing it is not by neglecting the normal activities that the government will batter you into delivering anyway. But on top of that, your additional idea that what way you can make a difference, and that is something which that we do in the district, and it keeps us going for the rest of our civil service career. DMship is the best memories of our life, because it gave you the world of opportunities, and an opportunity to try your own instinct, your own capabilities and your preferences, and then deliver and make a mark. So that is the backbone. And if I may give an example, for instance, election. The biggest management event of the world is the election.
Yeah.
And 90 countries rolled into one is the size of our election.
Yeah.
Now the same bureaucracy, which is contemptuously called babus, or sometimes inefficient, lazy and corrupt, when they come under the election commission, and about 60% of our IAS, IPS work directly under us, they deliver a zero error election every time. And there again, the backbone is the DMs and the SPs.
Yeah.
Because ultimately we have to deliver through them, and they do a fantastic job. We're giving the leadership, we have to give them protection, and those who are not honest, we know how to identify them and isolate them.
Right.
But once we have chosen them, we back them to the hilt, and we make them deliver, and they do and they bring pride to the country.
And we've seen in the recent US elections what can happen if you don't have such an infrastructure in place. You can take days counting votes, as opposed to how efficiently it's done in India. I think it's quite remarkable, isn't it? We underplay the importance and the efficiency of our own election commission, I think.
In fact, it is important to remind that Hillary Clinton once publicly in a public meeting described India's election as a gold standard for the world. I had set up in my time an institute in the election commission called India International Institute of Democracy and Election Management on the top floor of the election commission. And do you know, in 6 years, 85 countries have trained from us.
Wow.
And from most countries, the entire commission and the top management has come and learned from us. We have become a Jagat Guru, and all that has been achieved by our bureaucracy.
Right.
Whom we, media particularly is condemning all the time. Not you, Kaveri.
But Mr. Iyer, let's go back to this whole idea of, in a way, elections also, we moved from paper ballots to EVMs. That was also a behavioral change. And of course, in your case, the Swachh Bharat triumph was entirely behavioral change. Getting 500 million people to change the way they look at sanitation is not easy. So what are the things that you brought to the table, which you had, trained, which you trained for, which the IAS had trained you for?
Sure. Kaveri, as Dr. Qureshi mentioned, the DM, the district magistrate, as he's known in UP by other names, collector, deputy commissioner, they're really the backbone of administration in India. Each one of them is managing on average of 2.5 million people. It's huge, right?
Yeah.
And so that responsibility, that leadership you're thrust into at a very young age by any young collector, that makes a phenomenal difference in terms of responsibility, leadership, innovation, and tackling major problems and solving them.
Right.
So I think that experience stands everyone in very good stead. And in fact, in the Swachh Bharat mission, we use that formula, which we're kind of used to in the UP cadre, but every cadre talks about it. The formula is PM, CM, DM. Right? Prime Minister, Chief Minister, District Magistrate.
Right.
I learned about that when I was a young private secretary in the government of India.
Yeah.
And there was someone who worked with Mr. VP Singh. He was Defense Minister. I was PS to Mr. Arun Singh.
Arun Singh, yes. Yeah.
And this gentleman said, he said, "Saab, aap Delhi itne jaldi kyun aa gaye the? India mein to keval 3 hi job hote hain, PM, CM, DM, which matter." And he reminded me that, and of course I went back to UP and did my district. But I think that is a pivotal role.
Right.
But I've also got to say that in the Swachh Bharat mission, in terms of that behavior change, which really became a Jan Andolan, I've got to give the full credit to the Prime Minister, to be absolutely frank. And I think Dr. N.C. Saxena talks about it in his book as well, where it's that political leadership which really made this program succeed. So, for example, sanitation had been going on for a long time in India. And what we learned from our experience, and which 55 sanitation ministers from around the world learned, the Secretary General came for our first conference. We spoke about the 4 Ps.
Yeah.
The first P is political leadership.
Hmm.
This was the first time that the Prime Minister of India was talking about sanitation and toilets in his first address from the Red Fort on August 15, 2014. That was a game changer.
Yeah.
Then it was public financing. More than $20 billion, about 1.3 lakh crores were invested in sanitation, something which no other country had ever thought of, right? The finance minister has got scarce resources, but under the sort of guidance of the Prime Minister, they allocated funds for a public good like sanitation, which was critical. The third was partnerships. How do you partner with grassroots organizations, with international development organizations, with NGOs, with the media? And I think, as Dr. Qureshi has spoken, the media was on the whole quite supportive of the Swachh Bharat mission.
Yeah.
Obviously, there were problems and there were criticisms. And the fourth was people's participation. So how did we get people to participate? We had 600,000, 6 lakh plus Swachhagrahis on the ground.
Yeah.
And Dr. Qureshi said Haryana was doing tremendously well, where Swachhagrahis on the ground were motivating communities, triggering behavior change, getting women involved. And it became a friendly competition. And then, of course, as you said, for the young collectors, we had to motivate and incentivize them, get them excited about the Swachh Bharat mission, to feel part of a national program. And there was a friendly competition as well, where they were competing to make their districts and even states open defecation free. And then finally, we supported the collectors by giving each one of them a young professional whom we call the Zilla Swachh Bharat Preraks.
Right.
So we had a partnership with the Tata Trust. They gave us these young professionals who became the eyes and ears of district magistrates, so that the collector had a person on the ground who was running the program on his or her behalf, and so that they could actually then steer the program accordingly. So no question, the collectors played a big role, and it was important to get them into the program, have a buzz, and make them excited about it.
Dr. Qureshi, you also are part of the Cluster Innovation Center, and I think there you do a lot of teaching and mentoring of young people in innovative practices. What are the innovative practices that you have sort of picked up through your very long and distinguished career? There's a very interesting anecdote that Mr. Iyer refers to in his book, where he talks about how Arun Singh scolded him because he wasn't taking notes, and how that convinced him after that, and he made sure that he would always have either his notepad or his iPad, because he told him, you obviously have a remarkable memory, and you can remember everything that I've told you. But what are the things that sometimes the political leadership teaches you, and you can actually take that forward? That was one question. And the second question was, of course, about the innovative practices, which we'll also come to Mr. Iyer about. So talk a little about how political leadership sometimes can be, quite good.
Now, two things. But before that, I was in the Cluster Innovation Center of Delhi University just for 1 year. But somehow it has continued to be on the internet as my biodata, and moved on to various other things. But that is not to bring down the importance of Cluster Innovation Center, and probably it has ceased to function also. But I will talk about the importance of innovation.
Yeah.
And I have noticed from the beginning, because of the inspiration and the talk which Mr. S.K. Misra gave me in the very first year of joining the service in Haryana, that each one of us has a capability of producing something unique, something original, innovate. So innovation, and every post, I don't want to start counting everything, because that will be embarrassing, talking about your personal achievement. But from my very first posting, just for example, where Sonipat subdivision, where all the vegetables to Delhi come from Sonipat and the other surrounding district. So there was since the vegetables and fruit are perishable, there was no cooperative society for them. I set up a cooperative society. I opened a shop in the mandi, and there was an agitation by the mandi people against me, and even a threat to my life in the time of Mr. Bansilal. They were a threat to my life, and but that thing survived for the 40 years. I don't know whether it's still there or not. But just to give an example, even very early on, you are able to innovate. It is entirely up to you, because the sky is the limit. And I'll come to the latest election commission. I was the 17th chief election commissioner. We have had 6 after that. I'll talk of 4 innovations which I did because I had the power. Only thing is, all IAS officers should be made to understand that if you have the power, you must use it. Why are you shy? Why are you reticent? For instance, there used to be 3 joint secretary jobs. I created 4 more because there was nothing to stop me. And what did I create them for? I set up a voter education division, and which has brought about participation revolution. You know, and interestingly, in 2006, when I was the junior most commissioner, but a communication PhD, when I saw 20%, 24% turnout in some district, I said we must have voter education. At that time, I was advised, okay, no, you do it in your time. Educating voters is not your job. I said it is very much our job, because when there is low turnout and you win an election with 10% vote, you are not representing 90%. So it raises a question of your legitimacy as a representative, right? So I set up voter education division. I set up an expenditure monitoring division, which after which we started seizing money, 2,000-3,000 crores we have seized, and all that is a history. Of course, and in my book, An Undocumented Wonder, The Making of the Great Indian Election, I documented 40 modus operandi of abuse of power, money power, cheating. And how to stop that. Of course, they have now innovated more, and the problem per se. I started National Voters Day. Again, you have to be responsive. I was in Odisha, Bhubaneswar, talking to a civil society meeting about 50-60 people. Somebody from the audience raised his hand and he said 18 years is an age to celebrate. I said, oh, that's a very good statement. Let us think of a celebration. Within a week, we came out with the world's biggest youth empowerment program, the National Voters Day. That everybody who will become 18 on 1st of January, we identified them. In fact, if you allow me, since you're talking of bureaucracy, and this will be interesting for Param also, we decided that we will celebrate 25th January, which is the Founders' Day of Election Commission, a day before India became a republic, we were founded. So we will celebrate it as National Voters' Day. So, and we will look for those who will become 18 by 1st of January, and in 800,000, 8 lakh functions across the country, वहाँ new voters को हम card दे देंगे. I wrote a letter to the then cabinet secretary, Mr. Chandrasekhar. That cabinet secretary था, we are going to celebrate National Voters Day, 8 lakh functions organize करेंगे. I request you to please inform all the states and the ministries to give us cooperation. It's a normal courtesy letter which Param is also aware of. Now, September, October, November, December gone. 19th of January, 6 days before the event, I get a call from Chandrasekhar. Qureshi, your proposal for National Voters Day is coming before the cabinet. The moment he used the word proposal, my heart sank. Damn it, I have already achieved it. I'm, all made all the arrangements, and you're calling it a proposal. And what if this proposal is rejected? So he said, I have to ask you 2 questions. I said, tell me what. He said, number 1, do you want a national holiday? I said, no, I don't. He said, how much money do you want? I said, I don't want a single rupee. He says, what, are you mad? You say you're going to organize 8 lakh functions and you don't want any money. I said, I'm not mad, and I know because registering voters is my job anyway. I do it round the year. I'm just converting it into an event for a larger impact. No one. This must be the only proposal in India's history which was passed in the cabinet without a cabinet memorandum. And how complicated cabinet memorandum process is, maybe Param will tell you. So innovation, and I had also mentioned to you about the institute, IIIDEM, which I set up with a lot of criticism. 85 countries have trained from us beside our own 11 million people. It is basically for our own people. But the fact that we became our soft power, we became a flagship for democracy worldwide. Now, all this was possible. It was within our powers. I just dared to use it. Others are reticent and not so rash. So I wish they could all be so bold.
Can we talk a little about political leadership? How important is that?
Very good point. In fact, from our academy days in 1971, this was one thing which we were taught to us very sensitively, our relation with the politician. Oh, they will always be in conflict. You will always be in conflict. But my own experience, I was the district magistrate or the deputy commissioner of Gurgaon. And I found that 95% of the time there is no clash with the politician. So 5% are the clash areas, and so my solution to both of them, my response to both of them was like this: that wherever there is the likely conflict, all you need to improve is your communication. Suppose a minister says, you have dismissed the sarpanch, suspended the sarpanch, and he's my man, and so just go back to him with all the information. Yes, sir, your sarpanch has committed so many offenses, and he is doing so much of bribery and corruption, and he is making you unpopular. So 9 times out of 10, he will say, "Acha, ek juta meri taraf se bhi marna," because you communicated. Now, if you dismiss him from the beginning, no, main nahi karunga, that's not okay. Communicate with him. And 95% of the time, they also want good work. Now, Param did a fantastic work, but he is not going to stand in election. The benefit will be coming to the political leadership who gave him all the support. So when we are working in the administration and doing good job, why should the politician be jealous of us? He is actually most honest politicians actually get IAS officers posted in their district and subdivisions because they know that these youngsters are the guys who can deliver. And if you see, there are 2-3 the Twitter handle of IAS at work and DC of IAS. You see every day, somebody or the other is doing fantastic work. And have you seen any instance when an IAS and an officer is transferred from the district and people cry, or there is a demonstration, they don't want him or her to go, and this only happens for the IAS officers, because they are doing such good work that people start loving them and they don't want them to go. So I think there's a politician and civil servant relationship is a bit exaggerated, but it is not to deny that it doesn't exist. In UP, for instance, the average tenure of a DM or SP is 4 to 5 months. Most of them live out of their suitcases. And now initially I may be brave, no, I don't care. If they transfer me, they transfer me. But 2 transfers and my back will be broken. Because every time I have to withdraw my children from school and get them admission with, you have to go and beg the principals of the school to please take my children. So it disturbs the family life, and they understand that. They use transfer as a weapon. And to say, no, don't be bothered about transfer, I think it is easier said than done. So the best is that, okay, get transferred to the state capital, where the clash with politicians is minimal, and forget about your dream tenure in the district or subdivision.
Right. Mr. R, what do you have to say to that? The whole idea of transfer being used as a weapon, and does that sometimes cow down youngsters who really want to do things? Does that disappoint them? Does that make them disheartened?
Yeah, look, as Dr. Qureshi said, and he's one of the persons all of us have looked up to and been inspired by. It is a challenge. There are situations on the ground where you get into conflicts despite best efforts, and I fully agree about the need to communicate, and it makes a lot of difference. Now, in UP, for example, traditionally, the tenures of district collectors and officers has been less stable than in other states. Having said that, I worked for a year in Bijnor, which was above the average, as was mentioned by Dr. Qureshi. And I was a little disappointed when I was transferred from Bijnor, because, we were in the midst of the total literacy campaign and it was going pretty well. And so I was transferred to Lucknow. And, but as it turned out, I think one of the qualities of an IAS officer, you always kind of land on your feet.
Right.
And so when I reached Lucknow, and, I was in rural development, so I kind of seized that moment, right? And I think that's one of the things coming out in my book, Carpe Diem, right? You seize opportunities which come to you. I think we get a lot of opportunities in the civil service, and we need to, see what is our area of interest and never let those opportunities go by. So, and that's how the Swachh program started. So, I think transfers are a kind of part of life for us, and we've got to go with the flow. Sometimes it can be a little demoralizing, But I strongly believe that you've got to make the most of the moment. You've got to seize the opportunity. And I took it with both hands and sort of got into the water and sanitation sector. And similarly, I was incredibly lucky later in my second insider stint
Yeah.
to be recalled to the government of India. I feel that it was, there was something working out there. In my wildest dreams, I never thought I would come back. When I heard the Prime Minister talking about, toilets, the indignity of women and girls who have to go out in the open, and how he was going to make India open defecation free by that symbolic date of 2nd October 2019, Gandhiji's 150th. I remember telling my wife in Vietnam, I don't know what I'm doing out here. I wish I were back. And somehow it happened 15 months later. And so so all of us, I think, in the service, whichever profession you are, I feel that there are moments when, things happen to you and you've got to seize the moment. I mean, Dr. Qureshi has been an education specialist, but he transformed the work of the Election Commission. And I remember that communication outreach called SWEEP, which he initiated about voter education. Now, if he hadn't been there, it probably wouldn't have happened. So I think we get a chance, and most of us seize the opportunity. But I think that's something which we need to remember. Wherever you are, you can make a big difference. You've got to go with the flow and take it as it comes, I believe, because there are going to be twists and turns in everyone's career. And I think rather than worry about it too much, treat it as an exciting journey and seize the moment.
Yeah, and I think you've done that really well. How did your experience in the civil service enrich your experience at the World Bank?
Sure. So, that field experience, there's really no substitute for having that grassroots experience, which we get both as subdivisional magistrates, as collectors, as chief development officers. So when and because I had that experience at the grassroots level in the Swachh project in the mid 90s, I think that gave me the comparative advantage of doing really well in the World Bank, because typically in the bank, you have some very bright people. A lot of them are PhDs from renowned universities. They have very good academic backgrounds and they have good domain knowledge, but they don't have that much of field experience. And I think it's that combination of field experience along with that domain knowledge which makes a big difference. So coming into the bank, my experience of having developed and led a grassroots community-led water and sanitation program, which was then very much in vogue internationally, what is known as the demand responsive approach, and making the users, communities, especially women, take charge of their own destiny and manage their own systems. We had done that for 4 years in the Swachh project in the hills of UP and a little bit in Bundelkhand. So that experience was extremely handy. And so when I came in, initially I was a little fazed by all the PhDs and all that intellectual talk, if you like. But very soon I realized, and everyone realized, that the experience counts. So as I started acquiring that kind of global knowledge, which is really important, and I think that's one thing the World Bank does very well, because it's not just a money bank, it's a knowledge bank. Okay. And that bringing together of knowledge and experiences and cultures from across the world, that really enriches you both in terms of your work, but also in terms of the cultural environment. So working initially in India, then working in Washington, working in Africa, working in China. I did a lot of work on China. It gives you that international exposure. But my experience in government always helped me. So for example, when I was in China, and when the county magistrate knew that I used to be a district magistrate, you strike that rapport with your client counterpart. Similarly, in other countries, whether it was in Bangladesh or even in Pakistan, where you swap stories about, your days as a collector, as an administrator, I think you strike a rapport, and that sort of enhances your ability to engage effectively with your client.
Right. Dr. Qureshi, you agree with that, this experience really serves you at a global level, and you've also interacted with the best in the world in making elections work elsewhere as well. How has that informed your experience?
Yeah, no, I entirely agree with him. Nationally, particularly, you're never an outsider or a stranger. If suppose your car breaks down, all you need to do ring up the collector, and suddenly you will have 2 cars, and then all kinds of hospitality wherever. And even post-retirement till today, for me or for my family, if inform the collector, they go out of the way. But unlike the Param's experience of the counterparts in other countries, we haven't, I didn't come across that kind of thing, because our interaction with civil servants was not so much.
Right.
Mostly it was with the election managers, and election managers in most countries are not civil servants. They used to be surprised that in India, we can deliver a neutral and fair election through civil service. And I used to tell them that only we trust the civil servant, because for one reason, that they are professionals, political government come and go. And secondly, for a practical reason, that a civil servant, we have him by the neck for the next 35 years. He knows that if he misbehaves and we put him on notice, or we take action, well, his career will be jeopardized, which is why they do not try to act smart with us. They tried to initially, but once they've seen that these guys are smarter and older and gray-haired, so they fall in line, and they behave, and they give you the best possible election. Right. So internationally, our unique experience of using the civil service. In Pakistan, for instance, they use judiciary. I remember one chief election commissioner who was a judge of has been judge, governor, everything. And he used to come and started calling me beta. He used to take copious note like a student, how India does it. So मैंने कहा कि साहब आपकी problem ये कि although you have two advantages, you are from judiciary, and judiciary has more respect than bureaucracy. Right. Secondly, we are recruited, we are appointed by the government of the day. You are appointed through a collegium system with leader of opposition signing, so your credibility is more. So what is holding you back? Go ahead and do it. He says कि साहब हमको election का experience नहीं है. Obviously, judiciary को election का experience नहीं होता. हमको है. हमने पहले दिन से as ACUT, I was a presiding officer of a single booth. Right. My training trainer, DC Mitra H. Goswami, God bless him, he passed away. There were election in 1972, and while my batchmates were posted as supervisors here, there, big officers, he posted me as a presiding officer of a single booth, where normally school teachers are appointed. I was very upset and in Karnal district in 1972, and I was very upset. And to add to my discomfiture, there was a story floating around that in the previous election, one presiding officer forgot to bring his rubber stamp along with the kit, and he ran 12. He was so scared, he ran 12 kilometers to fetch that stamp. With those comforting thoughts, I became a presiding officer. But that is an experience. Because then the collector says कि बेटा, this is the only time जब तुम अपने हाथ से काम करोगे. बड़ा अफसर तो तुमने जिंदगी भर रहना है. अभी हाथ से काम करोगे तो ये. So when I became the election commissioner, I sought him out. He was in Delhi living a retired life. I was out of touch. I called him up. मैंने कहा सर आपकी foresight 36 साल पहले के आपने मुझे ये experience दिया, and I felt that I had an advantage over or even my counterpart commissioners. Because I had been a presiding officer. I don't know whether Param has worked as a presiding officer or not. He was always have been an observer and a supervisor.
No, he's been down a manhole as well. I think he must have done it at some point. But
no, we need the answer from him. Have you?
Yeah. No, sir, no, I've not been a presiding officer. I've been a returning officer for 423 Mussoorie in the assembly elections.
Yeah. That is the point. In presiding officer, koi nahi hota.
Yes, sir. You're right.
Great. So before we go, of course, I'd like to again recommend and commend to everyone both your books. I think they're quite remarkable reads and readable reads. I'd like to ask you, what is the one piece of advice you'd like to give any young person who wants to join the civil service? First of all, why should any young person join the civil service? Mr. Ayu?
Sure. Look, I think it's a fascinating career, and it's the ability to have impact on the ground at scale, which puts it in a completely unique space. And, I can say without hesitation that even though I'm supposed to be a domain expert in water and sanitation and having worked internationally, if I hadn't been in the IAS, didn't know the system, didn't have the networks, I wouldn't have been half as effective working with the state governments, with chief secretaries, with collectors. So there's no question about that. And so I think that the ability to have impact, to make a difference, is unparalleled in the civil service and in the IAS. And we have heard so much from Dr. Qureshi about his experiences. Every IAS officer goes through a remarkable journey, and it's that ability, that opportunity to really transform the lives of people on the ground, to make a difference in whether it's a social sector or any sector. You can see results. You can do a lot of good in the lives of poor people. And I think that's completely unique. I don't think there's any other job in the world which gives you that opportunity. And so I think that's the reason why it's great to join the IAS. It's tough to get in. If you get in, you've got to be quite lucky, like I was. But if you get in, you can do a transformational job, and you can make a big difference in the lives of people.
Absolutely. Dr. Qureshi?
Yeah, and I entirely agree with what Param said, 100%. I will only add that the variety of experiences that this service gives you, which is what I initially said, that it keeps you on your toes and you have to keep learning. And that is why you never go stale. That is the important thing. And when I'm asked this question, and every week a couple of civil servant aspirants come to me seeking some advice, I always tell them, given another option, I will still opt for the IAS with all its constraints and problems. And in fact, I'd like to ask Param, if he's giving the option of joining the World Bank or IAS, what will you opt for?
IAS, so therefore, without any doubt.
Now, secondly, when he said he was lucky to make it, of course, we were all very lucky to make it. But I don't think we should just put it down to luck. The fact that 1 million people compete for 300 posts.
Wow.
So obviously the ones who are chosen are the best. And after that, to doubt their ability and to raise questions, I have noticed even from the media, those who are critical of the IAS, the first question I ask them, did you ever try for the IAS and fail? So if you tried and failed, you have no business to comment on the IAS.
Is it still the steel spine of India, Dr. Qureshi?
Well, it is in the sense that, in fact, Prime Minister Modi has demonstrated it. Yeah, his individual style of working, some people may be critical of that. The fact that it isn't bureaucracy, which is standing by, the quiet, faithless bureaucracy, which is doing all the solid work. Now, after all, who did this Aadhaar thing?
Right.
R.S. Sharma. Yeah. But you know it by Nandan Nilekani. Yeah. Now, one thing which I have noticed that, people from outside, if it is Korean or Sridharan and Nandan Nilekani, you bend over backwards to accommodate them, whatever they wish. And a poor IAS officer, if he wants something, even a peon, you don't give him with dignity. So now you have allowed them to work beyond 60 years, 70 years, 80 years. Now, whereas an IAS officer in UP is there for 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. Now, what do you expect? In any case, the stability, the respect, the support, if you give each one of us, and or at least majority of us are capable of making a difference, you just have to give them the right environment. And as I proved from the election, given their environment, same bureaucracy, you call them names, but they deliver.
Yeah.
No, not because they love us, because we know how to use our danda also, and also persuade them, and how to select them, choose the good ones from the bad ones. So, and all that, after all, these are our skills, and that makes us specialists and technocrats. So we should remember that after all, we are quality people. We have come through a national competition.
Yeah. And Mr. Iyer, now, are you an insider, an outsider, or an insider? What are you right now?
In fact, Kaveri, that whole subtitle came to me, originally because, as Dr. Qureshi mentioned, when you're allotted to a state cadre, you either get into the insider quota or the outsider quota. So that was a sort of, the context. For me, of course, being an insider, outsider, insider is reference to government.
Yes.
So I was an insider, and then I was an outsider. And apart from being in the World Bank, I think perhaps my most interesting outsider experience was being road manager and coach to my daughter, who's a tennis professional. That was a fascinating very, very enriching experience.
That
Then
was
I
2 years, sir, wasn't it?
That was for 2 years, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, I was insider number 2 when I came back. Now I guess I'm an outsider again. I'm outside the government, and I'm an insider in the World Bank. I'm back in the World Bank in Washington in the water practice.
Right.
But I think that, frankly, this experience of being in and out, firstly, as Dr. Qureshi very correctly mentioned, having both insiders and outsiders in a particular cadre is a fantastic idea, because that's actually integration at a national level on the ground, where you've got people from different states coming together. But I think the experience of working inside and outside government is a very, very enriching one as well.
Right.
And it gives you a completely different perspective when you're outside. And then you come back, you can bring in those insights. It helps to enhance your effectiveness inside government. And I think that, that's an experience which would be sort of many young officers in whichever sectors they are, whether it's in the government or young professionals.
Yeah.
I think it's quite useful to go outside, in a sense, your comfort zone,
Hmm.
acquire a new experience, and if you like, come back. So I think this kind of experience is only to the good. And I feel we should see more and more of this, because it enhances both the effectiveness in government as well as the experience outside the government.
Right. And I love that Mr. Nipin Mishra, when you came back, said that he's come back to do some real work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, he was a very, very, he gave me some phenomenal advice, became a
Right.
big mentor, but, that was quite a telling remark.
Yes. Dr. Qureshi, you had something to say?
No, I have a question for Paraman in all seriousness, in the context of insider outsider. He is a Tamil person who came to Hindi speaking UP at the age of 21. I really want to ask you whether you have forgotten your Tamil and whether your children speak Tamil. No, that is the sacrifice which the service officers make.
So you're spot on. You're spot on. My actually, to be frank, my Tamil was never very strong to start with, but I was the way I got into UP, as you said, was very interesting. So my father, who was an Indian Air Force officer, now at the ripe age of 91, he's still the running air marshal. That time he was a group captain commanding a Air Force station in Chakeri near Kanpur. And I was doing the exam then. We were sitting in his office, and I had to fill in the form. In those days, you had to give your choice for your cadre, zone-wise. So I said, what should I write? And he said, listen, we are sitting in UP. UP is a great state. Just write UP. And so I wrote UP. And I found it a fabulous cadre to work with. It's very interesting. UP, many people think UP is a bit chaotic and, it's very difficult to work. And as an outsider in UP, I think, as Dr. Qureshi mentioned, I was welcomed with open arms. And in fact, one of the reasons why they wanted me to go as a collector of one of the Kawal towns was precisely because I was an outsider.
Right.
So there was a perception that you'd be more neutral and impartial. So I had a fantastic time as an outsider, technically, in UP, but I throughout was made to feel like an insider.
Right. And do your children speak Tamil? I think that was Dr.
No, and I forgot to answer that question. Dr. Qureshi is right. Their Tamil is even weaker than mine.
That's all right. It's a small sacrifice, I think. Thank you both, gentlemen. It was such a pleasure to talk to you. And I'll hold up the 2 books again. Please do read them. And I think for any civil service aspirant, for anyone in the services, this is an absolutely wonderful conversation. Please do listen to it. Thank you very much, Mr. Iyer. Thank you very much, Dr. Qureshi.
We hope you really enjoyed that session. You can find the entire schedule of ThinkEdu 2021 on our website eventexpress.com. You can watch the rest of the sessions on our YouTube channel, eventexpress.com, newindianexpress.com and edxlive.com. You can also check out our Facebook and Twitter handles. Thank you for watching. Swami Vivekananda's ideas, ideology, and relevance are discussed and debated a lot even today. Makarand Paranjape, the director of the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, and Dr. S.Y. Subramaniam, the Vice Chancellor of Shastra deemed to be university, will discuss the sage's modernity of tradition in a conversation with the New Indian Express's editorial director Prabhu Chawla.
Welcome, gentlemen. I'm going to take the privilege of asking the first question, which is, of course, to Makarand Paranjape. Swami Vivekananda is so many things to so many people. To me, he's really like a self-help guru. All his writings, all his teachings. There's so much in them. Of how to live your life, how to have strength, how to overcome weakness. But of course, he is relevant to education as a whole, and I think Indian education as a whole, and the way you have interpreted him and updated him as he interpreted and updated traditional Hinduism has been quite remarkable. So I want to put it to you, Makarand, how is he so relevant in so many ways, whether it is the way he looks at religion, whether it is the way he looks at caste, or whether it's the way he looks at that whole idea of the Islamic body and the Vedanta mind. There's so many ideas in his philosophy which are so relevant. So where do we start? You tell us.
I guess we can start with the topic of today's discussion, which is education.
Yes.
And in this book that you were mentioning, I think it's called Hinduism and India's Road to Modernity.
Yes.
Swami Vivekananda, Hinduism and India's Road to Modernity. I've got a chapter on national education.
Right.
And the idea is, and the subtitle is Man Making Among the Colonized.
Yeah.
Of course, man making includes, woman making, because the things that...
sensitive issue here.
No, but he was a great feminist as well. I think Makarand will talk about that.
He was. In fact, in his ideas on education, he emphasized that women should be educated, because if you educate one woman, you're educating an entire family. So, and we are talking about a time when literacy among the women in India around the end of the 19th century was less than 1%. In fact, it was closer to 0.8% if you look at some statistics. So he was quite a pioneer in that respect. But I just wanted to mention, since our program is in some ways related, to Tamil Nadu, Shastra universities there, and the New Indian Express is also, it also comes out from the south a lot, Chennai. There is a wonderful book, a small book called Education, compiled from the speeches and writings of Swami Vivekananda. This has been written by T.S. Avinashilingam. Now, the reason I bring this up is because later on, T.S. Avinashilingam went on to become the first education minister of Tamil Nadu. And the first thing he did was to bring in Tamil medium instruction, which was not there at all. Now, the reason I bring this up is because when he was in jail during the Quit India movement, Avinashilingam did a compilation, taking excerpts from Swamiji's extensive writings. In fact, at that time, 9 volumes were not out, some 6, 7 volumes were out. And he compiled it into this little booklet, which is still relevant. The reason I mention this is obviously Swamiji's ideas on education are scattered throughout his writings, and he was very passionate about it. But I think I've given the clue to the overall idea of Swamiji, which is basically he wanted a national education, which later Sri Aurobindo and others picked up. But he also wanted an education which I would call the Tattvamasi model of education. What is this Tattvamasi model as opposed to Tattvam Nasmi? That is, I'm not, Nasti, I'm not that. I am that. Tattvamasi as opposed to I'm not that model of education. Whatever, we can unpack that Mahavakya from the Upanishads. But the basic point that Swamiji was making is that education is the perfection already manifest within us. So that's completely different from the idea that we got from the West, which is from Locke and others, John Locke, that the mind is a tabula rasa, and you've got to inscribe like an empty slate, you write things on it. And even today, we stuff the mind with information, and in a way, it's a kind of brainwashing. Now, I know other people want to say important things here, so I'm not going to keep talking. But the thing I wanted to really emphasize is that if you look at the last quarter of the 19th century and right up to 1950s, there were a whole host of experiments in the area of education in India. You know, it's not just Swamiji. Before him, there was Rabindranath Tagore. After Swamiji, there was Gandhi, who talked about Nai Talim. Shri Krishna, Sri Aurobindo and the mother talked about free progress. Jiddu Krishnamurti talked about education a lot. And, right till today, we are experimenting with education. Chinmaya Mission has many schools. And before that, let's not forget Dayanand Saraswati, okay, who started this Anglo Vedic model, as it later came to be called DAV. And perhaps Mr. Chawla himself studied in one of those institutions. I don't know. But it was a very influential type of model all over North India. Now, the reason I'm saying this is that it was not accidental that all these great thought leaders, savants, educators, even women like, I say even because Pandita Ramabai Saraswati, a real strong pioneering women who converted to Christianity, though she was a Vidushi. Anyhow, now, all these people got into this field of education because they believed it was the key to transformation. On the one hand, it was the key to winning our freedom, being decolonized, getting rid of the British, but not just political freedom absorbed their energies and attention. They wanted human transformation on a scale unimagined before. So it was about a consciousness revolution. And they believed that the right kind of education would release the energies of the slumbering masses of India, who had been deprived for 1,000 years after the fall of Nalanda. We had never had a big university in India. We're talking about 1193, 94, when I don't want to use a negative terminology, but many of our institutions were really destroyed. And about Nalanda, it is said that there were so many manuscripts and books there that when it was set on fire, and you can still see the walls of the old Nalanda scorched with flames, they are blackened even today after excavation. So it was smoldering and burning for months on end. Of course, luckily, some of the valuable tomes and granthas and manuscripts were taken to Tibet. So to conclude what I'm trying to say in this part, I feel that all of these great thought leaders, freedom fighters, as well as spiritual leaders of India wanted to transform not just India, but the world through a new type of education. And among these, certainly Swamiji was one of the pioneers.
Dr. Vaidya, would you like to take over from here?
Yeah. So before I just ask the next question, I just want to relate to what Dr. Makarand was saying, because I also am deeply impacted by the thoughts of Swami Vivekananda and this book, My India, which is a selection of his own writings, the India Eternal. He talks so much about education. And for Swami Vivekananda, for many of us, we see him as a very spiritually tall global Indian who thought ahead of the times. And today we still talk about his speech in the World Parliament of Religions, when actually the purpose of that was actually to establish a supremacy of a different order. He completely changed the narrative, the discourse that was happening in that particular event. And it was his view of India that actually brought India to forefront. So the way in which people started looking at India was completely changed after his discourse. Now, that is the real purpose of education for me, because I want India to be seen by the world through the lens of Indians who have understood the virtuous value of education, which presents the right perspective of India to the world, not an India that is taught by those outside India. Maybe they are right, maybe they are wrong, but definitely, there is some gap in the understanding perspective. So if the purpose of education, in my view, is to create enlightened individuals who can understand India and present India to the world, as India gains this leadership position, now, are we really building those types of educational institutions in our country? Now, having said that as the backdrop, Dr. Makarand, I just want to further ask you and take this discussion forward. What would you think is, your idea of Indian education? Is it first to ensure that the massification of education that we see today has also created a massification of the right thought of what true India is? Or are we just blindly running a race where we are just trying to make Indian education, go global, but not actually Indian in the real sense it has to be?
Exactly. I think the foundation of Indian pedagogy, if you want to use that word, was a deep inquiry into the self, and this ought to result in a transformation, not just in a narrow sense, but a transformation of personality and character. So if you look at the very first so-called convocation or valediction address, going back to the Chandogya Upanishad, that's when the teacher says, Satyam Vada Dharmam Chara. So Swamiji says that education is not the massification, to use your word, Dr. Vaidya. It's not a massification of information with the mind being a passive recipient, cramming things and then regurgitating them, because this was already happening. By the time Swamiji was a student at Presidency University, or college rather, it was Hindu college founded by Ram Mohan Roy and other people, very leading citizens of Bengal in around 1819, 1818, thereabouts. And then it became Presidency College. So he himself studied there. Then he went to Scottish Mission College, and he found that our entire pattern of modern education was an imitation of Western texts, curricula, and teaching methodologies. And today we talk about, I have taught at JNU, for the last 20 plus years, and we see the kind of youth we are producing. Some people call them the Tukde gang. But this goes right back to young Bengal, because the Derosians were also, people who took to questioning the so-called traditions. They were very rebellious, and a bit of it is good, because even Swamiji was a great rebel. But there's an apocryphal story of one of these Derosians. A lot of them, they turned their back on their own ancestral practices and faith. And, the father, told one of the Derosians that, before you go to college, do your pranam to the family deity, who was Kali. So he goes to the shrine and says, "Good morning, madam." And then he is off to college. And then at night, they have these beef parties. Now, again, I'm not talking about anybody's dietary habits, but somehow the idea that young people should be rebellious, and they should be rebellious in a certain manner, which is, in a sense, irreverent, produces a certain kind of individual. And Swamiji is saying rather that education is not the massification of information, but the building of character. Now, are we building character today? People laugh if you tell somebody that go to college to build your character. They laugh, because you go to college to lose your character. Whatever little character or values you may have, those will disappear. And all that will happen is that a superficial understanding, like even today, there are 100 people who have written in favor, of a particular freedom of expression and this and that at an elite Indian institution, which I shall not name, as if all that is important is to preserve. Of course, freedom is important. Please don't misunderstand me. But to preserve some artificial notion of freedom of expression to the extent that you have turned the entire institution, more or less, not that particular one, but even the one where I taught, into a platform to attack a particular ideology, a particular party, or frankly, even a particular leader. So Swamiji is saying that that is not the purpose of education. The purpose of education is to know yourself in the deep sense. And going back to the Chandogya Upanishad, when after spending 12 years with the guru, when the Shishya comes back, the father asks him, what have you learned? And that is where the point comes up, for discussion, which is that what our Upanishads are saying, and what the knowledge traditions of India are saying, what the wisdom traditions of India are saying, which is so relevant today, is that, this world that is outside us, so to speak, the external world, of which even science is obsessed through measurement and calibration to get a grip upon, that world and we ourselves are actually not just interlinked, but there is a unity of consciousness. Isha Vasyam Idam Sarvam Yat Kincha Jagatyan Jagat. So once you see the interrelationship between, the individual and the cosmos, it also includes the interrelationship between one individual and another, that is, social arrangements, political arrangements. It also includes relations with genders. These are not oppositional. Relation between generations, again, the last generation and my generation, what we may call tradition and modernity. It's not an oppositional relationship. The relationship between man and nature, that is the human, world and the natural world, the world of Prakriti. So this is not oppositional. Prakriti and Parmeshwar are not oppositional. So this is so relevant today because today we are talking about AI replacing human teaching. So you don't need, information is easily available. You don't need a teacher. Google can give you better information sometimes. Often it's also erroneous, but many times you can get good information on the World Wide Web. Okay. So the teacher is not to give information. A teacher is to facilitate. Post-Renaissance model of education that we have inherited posits man and nature. Man and man is Marx, okay? Because it's a social conflict between classes which drives the engine of history. Man and nature is the classical conflict brought about by modern science, where you want to conquer and control nature. Man and woman, feminism, man and God, Nietzsche, and so on. So what has it resulted in? It has resulted in a fractured world, fractured human society, an environmental crisis, and ultimately a schizophrenic modern Indian, who doesn't know, what his connection with his own past is, whether he wants to belong to some kind of universal Western modern civilization, or whether he wants to go back to what he doesn't realize or understand, he or she. So the reason why Swamiji is so important is that he takes us beyond the idea of education as garnering of information or skills. He takes us beyond the idea of education as being merely some sort of, livelihood, training, that you get some skill, you get some profession and earn a living. But he goes into an integral idea of education, which I would call Atmanization. Education is the process of Atmanization, which is to say that to understand who you are and to see the unity of consciousness, the unity of the cosmos, and also to build, the character and conduct which are conducive to individual and social transformation.
I'll intern here, if you allow me, please. Dr. Vidya, with your permission, Makarand, I must make it clear that when we started the Think Education Conclave, idea behind was very clear. We used to call it how to Indianize Indian education. For 9 years, we will be discussing that. How do we convert India into Indian education? Because what is happening now, that you refer to about universality of education, what is happening during the last 150 years, that from Western concept of education is trying to impose a universal model of education all over the world. You speak the same language, the same kind of accent, you must read the same kind of books, and you start thinking similarity. Because universe or India, or not India, universe is diversified. You have people from Japan to USA. USA is not a country, it's a country of every nationality. But the attempt has been made. India has been victim because the Britishers dominated here for 200 years. And we call it system of education, massification, you call it, or you want to call it, whatever you want to call it. But somehow, even during the past 70 years, this cartelization, or you call the monopolization of education system by certain views, who were, because going to Oxford or going to England was a badge of honor. Even now, people flaunt it that I have studied in Harvard, and I have studied it. In our education system, in the basic education, what you're talking about, Vivekananda and various other people you have named, in the school education, none of them is talked about. My grandchildren are looking at it, they're studying in a school which is much more Indianized than many other schools. But still, they read more Harry Potter than anybody else. They read Shakespeare, but nobody has told them to read Vivekananda. The question is, where is something, there's a fault line lies with us who are part of the administration. And Professor Vaidya is here. In his universities, I don't know how much Indianization or Hinduization, I won't call it, because Kaveri is getting angry there and literalization, because I'm saying Bharatiya Karan jo hai, Bharat is India, because I ask the question even to Prime Minister and Narasimha Rao. First I asked that question. So why a country, India, perhaps one of the very few countries, it has two names, one Bharat, one India. And that differentiates the whole problem here, because India thinks differently than what Bharat thinks. And therefore, this is a conflict going on in the education system as well. Because Indianization of Indian system, where Indian value system, from the Chedar and everything which you're talking about, ask only anybody from the primary school. Nobody has heard about it. And we have made no attempts to tell them that we have a rich heritage of literature, which nobody else perhaps got it. So where are the fault lines in our people who want to be part of the Western universal culture? And what is happening economically also. Even the economic model, the management model is being imposed what it taught at Harvard, what it taught there. Everybody thinking alike. Everybody talks about PPP model, which we never heard. It's not an Indian concept. So everybody is being imposed is a fashion. So how can we dismantle the fashionable strategy of keeping the Indian education slave to the Western way of thinking?
Well, I think you have already partly answered the question. I would only add that the process of decolonization is not as simple as it seems, because sometimes you throw the baby with the bathwater, you know. The fact is that we have a lot to learn from the West, and Swamiji was the first one to admit it. You know, when he went to the United States, he was actually stunned by the extent to which they had progressed materially. And many of their, should I say, social parameters were better than ours. Though, of course, there was tremendous racism that just come out of slavery, and there was no civil rights when he was there. That happened almost 100 years later in the 1960s. And he was often taken to be an African American and denied lodging also. So he saw that prejudice, but the status of women was much better than in India. And there was a lot to learn from the West in terms of their science, technology, and many other achievements. And Swamiji embraced that. So there was no artificial conflict in his mind. He never thought that being Indian means to reject modernity, to reject science and technology. No. But I think he understood, as a few of us have understood and believed, including Mahatma Gandhi, that the paradigm of civilization that the modern West has created is ultimately self-destructive. If you read Hind Swaraj, that is what he's saying. And we, every day, you see this whole economic crisis, energy crisis, ecological crisis, all of these point to the fact that, you know, without dharma, without moksha, just kama and artha will lead to an asuric civilization and self-destruction. So the point about what Swamiji was trying to say, the point that you're also raising, to Indianize Indian education is not just to reject the West with some kind of knee-jerk reaction, nor is it, you know, like some people say, you just have to adopt, you throw out English, you learn Sanskrit, or you learn English, or sorry, Hindi. You know, that won't do, because most of the modern paribhashik shabdavali, what we call the technical vocabulary, in any Indian language is translated from English, okay? So to understand who we are, to understand modernity and the West, and to find a way, I won't call it a cheap synthesis, because many things are incommensurate. You can't synthesize oil and water. They will not mix. You can't synthesize, so to speak. I mean, this is bad chemistry. I'm not a chemist. I'm just giving you metaphors. You can't synthesize sand and sugar. They're not going to mix. But you have to find a way, through which, because see, a knee jerk rejection of what we have gathered with great difficulty, a rejection of that will make us a nation of ignoramuses. Shut down the IITs, shut down this, break this down, destroy this. This is a new kind of khilji attitude, in my view. So you need a lot of depth, cultural depth, intellectual depth, and not just slogans to understand. And this great cultural depth that I'm talking about can't come through artificial intelligence or through computers alone, but needs teachers. And again, to go back to Swami Vivekananda, he actually believes in the Guru Shishya model. Okay. He says, unless you come in close contact with someone who can inspire you with his or her example, you will not be transformed. You'll get some information, but your being will not be altered. So it's like being in touch with a live wire. So it is some of these deeper things we've got to look at. And I must say one more thing, that if you look at the national education policy, there are many good things in it. Okay, we must applaud it. There's lots of freedom, lots of flexibility, lots of autonomy, learning in our own languages, and so on. But the important thing is somehow our emphasis when it comes to education is still technical education. We somehow feel that, and though I agree, I mean, I'm myself taught at IIT Delhi, and I'm a great believer of the IIT system and the way they nurture and mentor other IITs, like Mumbai IIT mentored, for example, Indore IIT. So their system is very robust. And actually,
but I'll interrupt because they're creating uniformity of IITs.
That's it.
That's the culture.
That is why I'm saying that won't do. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. And the point I'm trying to make is that to have deep cognition, you need language skills of a high order. For the ancient Indians, the model of knowledge was not mathematics as with the Greeks. It was Vyakran, our greatest and ancient text. If you leave aside the Vedas, it's actually Panini. It's actually, our Vyakran traditions are very of the highest order. Even today, Sanskrit, Paninian grammar is the model for machine language and much else. So for deep cognition, you need language. And unfortunately today, no young person knows any language very well. I'd be very happy if your grandchildren know Shakespeare well. But my experience, I've been, as I said, teaching in one of the leading Indian universities. Na to Hindi aati hai, na Angrezi aati hai, na Tamil. They don't know Tamil. They don't know Kannada properly. What they know is this, they take a smartphone, they can gather some things, they know an app, they download an app, and then they can give you some information. But that's not enough. For a civilization to reboot, which is what we are trying to do, after centuries of varying kinds of slavery, and Kaveri is here, the fountainhead of Indian knowledge traditions was Kashmir. And when Kashmir was destroyed, there was a huge loss. And some people fled to Banaras, some people fled to Tibet, and so forth. So there has been a destruction of the Indian knowledge society. We are a knowledge society. We exported knowledge forever until the last few hundred years. And now, we want to be Jagat Guru again, but we have to actually do some introspection, Atma Nigrani, whatever you want to call it, Atma Nirikshan, Atma Samiksha, all this is required. And, our institutions are being destroyed even as we speak. And that is why Dr. Vaidya and others are important, because, the private sector is filling a vacuum. Look at our public institutions. Look at our great institutions. I will name them since I come from one of them. I'm teaching there, though I didn't study there. JNU, DU, Shantiniketan, Vishwa Bharati, BHU, Central University of Hyderabad. They are all going through a crisis. There's a leadership crisis. There's a crisis in academics, in recruitment, and we have tied ourselves into knots. We have a complicated policy for both recruitment of students and staff, which is as complicated as the caste system. There are all kinds of quotas. Excellence is never an issue. Issue meaning it's not even a consideration. It's have you filled this quota? Have you filled that quota? And if you don't fill a quota, then they're going to come and bash you up. Okay. So you cannot generate leadership in thought. You cannot generate excellence for a new generation. You cannot create exemplars. You cannot create the kind of gurus who will inspire others when you have tied yourself into knots. And just as we destroyed the public sector so that the private people could do well, BSNL, VSNL, name it, Air India, everywhere, you sell national assets. I predict that soon, you will not want to send your children to state funded universities because you're not sure of the curriculum, you're not sure of the teaching standards, you're not sure if the semester will take place as scheduled. And therefore, again, the Harvards and the Yales and the Columbias will come in, they'll set up shop in India, and once again, you will open a door to a recolonization of India, a reorientalization of India, So these are the dangers. And therefore, we need political will, we need great capacity building, we need integrity, not ideology alone. Today, it's very fashionable, to spout an ideology to justify incompetence. Ideologies cannot paper over incompetence. We need to create highly competent people who will thrive in our educational institutions. Now they are being harassed, silenced, bullied, boycotted, branded, etc. All this is going on. And you see what's happening at the school level. Who will send their child to a government school? I'm in Himachal Pradesh. Government schools are running empty. It's a small state, less than 10 million people. And of course, a huge amount of your money and my money, taxpayers' money, is going down the tube. So, putting out a national education policy is not enough. We have to reform root and branch. And there has to be a national consensus for this, which we have yet to build, I'm afraid. So we will continue to tinker and talk about changing this and that. But we are very far from creating institutions which can compete globally and yet offer something which is nationally relevant. Because we have a unique, as I said, tradition, of knowledge building. We have built philosophies which are so incredible. Even Himalayan Buddhism has 20 siddhantas, just Himalayan Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism. If you take the arc from Ladakh to Arunachal, we don't know anything about these traditions, hardly anything. And these are traditions which have the capacity to transform individuals, as well as bring peace of mind to communities. In Corona, people are turning to these techniques and practices. And this is some of the things Swamiji talks about here, that you may know a lot about a particular discipline, but if you don't know yourself, you're not an educated person.
Right. Dr. Vaidya?
Yeah. Another very fascinating aspect of Swami Vivekananda was that he was a predictive spiritual leader. In fact, to make my statement good, he was the one after his 1893 speech, and it happened in Chennai in 1897. And he just said, I close my eyes and I can see Bharat Mata, free. And what he meant was he's seeing Bharat Mata free, and that's going to happen in the next 50 years. And India got its political freedom, Indian independence in 1947. So he predicted the Indian independence. And likewise, he was the one whose prognosis actually was, the proletariat revolution. Actually, he thought that it will happen either in Russia or China, much against a contrarian perspective that felt that strong trade unionized countries like England, that's where these revolutions will happen. But true to Swamiji's prediction, it happened in an agrarian economy like Russia. The third thing that he predicted was that India is going to be a superpower very soon. And that somehow aligns with our discussion today, that it to become a superpower, you cannot isolate education, because that's the quintessence of any country's progress. And since you also mentioned Hind Swaraj, when Gandhiji wrote that in 1908, and again, he had a chance to revisit the book in 1938. And when somebody asked him whether you want to change something, he said he couldn't even change a single word, because he didn't see anything change happening in those years. No, but that's not the case here. Now, if Swami Vivekananda were to come again, and then we ask him the question, what do you like to change in the education system that you could make India a superpower again? And given the Atmanization that you have spoken about, and the nuggets of that clearly visible in the Atmanirbhar Bharat, and education is also a focal piece, a frontal piece in that. If Swami Vivekananda comes again today, what would you think that he would have as the top three that Indian education system has to do to answer Mr. Prabhuchala's question? We have also been searching an answer for this question for the last 10 years. You Indianize Indian education, and you've said that it is not just neglecting certain and adopting certain things, but then it's beyond that. Now, given the fact that the new education policy is here, Atmanirbhar is here, I mean, these are all, terminological policy waves that are getting created. But in the policy wave, how can you ensure that the ecosystem finds a place to reach and thereby grow from there? Otherwise, we keep changing very often. We haven't even tasted success of these initiatives in the last 50, 60 years, because there is an accelerated pace with which policy has changed. We should stop. And if we are stopping now, how would we reboot, restart, in your own words? What top three things, as Swami Vivekananda, would you advise the policymakers?
Well, I dare not, try to step into his shoes. But from my own humble experience, all my life I've done nothing else but study and teach. Actually, I'm probably not fit for anything else. So, as soon as I finished, my PhD, I started teaching. I was teaching before I finished my PhD as a teaching assistant. I was teaching from the age of about, I would say, 19. And that's all I've done all my life. So I can tell you that we need massive root and branch reform. We have to rethink the reservation system. That doesn't mean that we do not have affirmative action of some kind, but trying to compensate past wrongs with present entitlements does not serve the cause of either natural justice or distributive justice. This is a political, should I say, compulsion. I don't know who will beard the lion, I don't know who is going to take this up, and I doubt whether anybody has the courage to talk about this, let alone to start a reform of this process. And this divides society, it creates tremendous resentment, and it's also very unfair to the so-called impoverished sections of the forward classes. There are some highly impoverished sections, and you can't then have one more reservation, which we've done now, for economically deprived, backward classes. One more reservation. So more reservation and even more to compensate for the wrong of an earlier reservation. And it's going to lead to, I think, a dominoes effect. And I will not be surprised if you have reservation over 100%, because these numbers don't matter now, because over and above 100%, then you'll have one more special quota, So this is how we are playing with the future of our nation. If we are honest and sincere, we should re-examine it. Secondly, we need curricular reform. Now, curricular reform also requires courage, because in certain subjects, the books are full of lies. If you look at a NCERT textbook for the 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, they are full of mistakes, lies. Somebody talked earlier about narrative. I think Mr. Chawla talked about. So this, all kinds of falsehoods are being peddled in the name of authorized and established histories. And we are so obsessed, with content. We should be focusing on critical thinking. So, of course, curricular reform is important, but I tell my friends, you're fighting, it's almost like a life and death battle to get some history book changed. But try and get the evaluation changed. You know what happens now is if you write an answer which is different from that answer in the prescribed textbook, you get zero. So what you've got to do is you've got to allow a person to have a different answer and yet be correct. Because all answers can be correct, depends on how you argue. So where is the emphasis on creativity and critical thinking? So curricular reform, then pedagogical reform. And frankly, get the government out of this. I've been saying for primary education, there are certain successful models. There are well established philanthropic and other foundations which are national minded. Have a public private partnership, set benchmarks. This system of government controlled school education is so much money down the drain. There are teachers in certain states who were asked, your school is in some remote district, why are you staying in the state capital? He says, for my children's education, it's better for me to stay here. You see, so they're getting paid, but they're not teaching. They go once a month and they fill out a roster. So when we talk about digital India and all, we have to stop these malpractices and you get the government out of some of this, and and yet where investment is required, investment is required. Government should be in the business, of ensuring, I mean, to have some regulation so that fly by night operators don't cheat people. You don't have a small should I say Barsati, and on top of that you say international management school jobs guaranteed. This is what's going on. So you have complete lack of regulation at one end of the spectrum where people are being exploited, and at the other end over regulation. You've done right to education, but this only seems to apply to certain kinds of communities, certain kinds of schools, and even the schools which exist will be shut down now because they don't meet those parameters. So you see, so much needs to be done, and I think we need to face the facts. We are not excellent in any, today I can say with certainty, we are not excellent in any department of education if you have any world parameters. We don't have a top university in India. IISc is an exception, but even then it's in the top 100 or something. Its rank is very low for a country of our size. Even our IITs, see, I have taught at an IIT. It's our students who are brilliant. What we do is we export mindware, we export manpower and woman power. We have not invented anything in the last 100 years, hardly anything. So we must come to terms with all this and not have a false notion of who we are based on some ancient achievements. We have to stand on what we are able to do today. And the only people who have got a Nobel Prize after independence are those who left India. After C.V. Raman,
Yeah.
he
and join the leftist bandwagon.
Yeah. No, no. I'm talking about scientists, no?
I'm talking about economists.
Yeah, there's only one of those, but I'm saying there are many Indian scientists who've got the Nobel Prize, and they could only do it abroad. You can't do, except for TIFR, one or two places, you can't really do cutting edge work even in science in India. And you can't throw money into the system and say, okay, now we'll keep our people. It's not so simple. So we have to be very honest. And if you're honest, sometimes you're disliked, because again, it seems as if, you're not giving a positive image. But image building.
Makarand, we went back from Vivekananda to other thing where these things started now. And then don't you think there's a problem here now? Academic institutions are being politicized now. They are looked at from the ideological point of view, as you pointed out in the beginning as well. Like Ashoka University, from the beginning, it started by somebody who's supposed to be American education. All the trustees were left because most of the people who are running good institutions, they have studied abroad and they have liberal point of view, which is sometimes turns out to be, in the current atmosphere, turns out to be anti-India, because from them definition is a different thing altogether. So what you're saying, PPP model, I'm coming back to, why can't we stop the bottom-up approach? Because you are talking, all of us are talking them top-down, IITs, IEM, because they are the basic causes of creating this kind of monopoly of such a kind of thinking here, because they control the mind, as you say, mind, they're trying to mold the mind molding which is happening in this country, because they're resisting the Indianization of the Indian system which is happening. And that is why the people sitting at the top, there's the person, you have Niti Ayog, where the person who has gone to a particular college said that college should be privatized. So they're talking about good institutions to be privatized as well, because they think that's the model. Okay, there's a private need for a private thing. But what is the education system we want? Why couldn't Japan import Western model? Japan is as nationalistic as we are. But why they are different than the rest of India? Think always in terms of Western technology. This imposition of Western technology, but nobody is thinking of bottom-up approach, how to change the system in the school. For 20 years from now, the school children will decide. NEP not handling that curriculum, what we are talking about it, that how to create the future people. At the moment process seems to be that people want to make Bharat into India. How can the process be reversed, make it convert, marginalize, minimize India, maximize Bharat? That should be the educational system which Vivekananda was talking about.
Yeah, but it's easier said than done. If you look at transformation, it's always by a small group of highly motivated and energized people. Even in the freedom movement, this bottom up. I think Dr. Vaidya was talking about the Soviet revolution, even in China. But the leaders were all bourgeois. Lenin was bourgeois, Marx was bourgeois. No working class leader. Mao was a well-off person. He came from an elite section of Chinese society.
Mahatma Gandhi, so was the Congress leadership.
Absolutely. We cannot expect people who don't have roti, kapda and makan to suddenly, transform society. Please, let's not be under any illusion about this. Ultimately, the leadership will come from the middle classes. I won't say upper classes because many of them have become irrelevant now. It is still a vibrant and expanding middle class in India. And there are top-down. Agastya International Foundation is working at the grassroots. There are people doing this and it can happen, but it can't happen without very high quality inputs. And it cannot happen without funding. And I like the Ashoka model because about 20, 30, 40 corporates got together, put their money. What's wrong with that? And, the issue is different. This cancel culture and what you call the ideologizing of higher education is possibly even a greater problem abroad because it's the liberals who are the most illiberal. Today, in the name of liberalism, they are completely intolerant of any idea, any view which does not conform to their idea of liberalism. So if you say universities should be places of free speech, then why did you prevent Richard Dawkins from speaking at Berkeley, which was supposed to be the forefront of student protests? Because he says something about a particular religion which offends a certain section of the liberal people. So you shut him out. So anybody you
Makarand, I gave you an example of mine last year before last. I was invited by Harvard to speak at one of their conferences. And later on, two students protested against me because I was a particular background and the invitation was withdrawn. And Nidhi Rajan was invited in my place.
But I think, see, I want to tell you, she suffered a worse fate than you can imagine. She got scammed for a job which didn't exist. So I think you got the better end of the bargain on a lighter note. But this intolerance in the name of liberalism, intolerance in the name of freedom of expression is a worldwide danger. And I predict that this will bring down the West also. It's not that the West is safe. They are also deeply divided and threatened. And this is an opportunity for us in India, frankly. But I'm afraid to go back to your point. You see, we lack the political will to make fundamental changes. So we make cosmetic changes, frankly. And this is true of all ideologies, and all political parties. They appease in varying degrees. And maybe it's a political compulsion. So I don't want to be entirely negative. And maybe also certain things will take time, but you have to call a spade a spade. And frankly, it's no longer trickle down, top down, bottoms up. It is comprehensive. The need of the hour is for a comprehensive, you might say, rebooting, rejig, all these words, you can use any kind of word.
Re-engaging.
Reject, reboot. See, it's comprehensive. It's not a matter of yahan se shuru karo ya wahan se shuru karo. You start at any end, but you'll end up trying to do more or less the same things to cleanse the system, to stabilize the system where it works, to protect the system, to protect national institutions in which billions and billions of Indian rupees have been invested. Okay, you have to protect these institutions, which are being, as I said, destroyed as we speak because of interference, because of politics, because of a certain kind of unionization, because of a certain kind of communal slash caste slash linguistic politics, and this is where again we come back to Vivekananda, because he wanted an idea of national education. And we sometimes forget this, but when Swamiji traveled, from Bengal to other parts of India, how did he communicate with intellectuals? He communicated in Sanskrit. So if you think that 24 languages will serve us, of course they'll serve us well at one level. But in India, we've always had two or three, so-called languages of learning, which is what has unified us. So Sanskrit should be revived, certainly, but English should not be rejected. English remains a very important link. It also gives you jobs. So people want to compare India with Japan. You can't compare India with Japan or Korea or even China. See, China imposed a form of Mandarin. And what they've done, therefore, is they've imposed one kind of language. And other countries are mostly monolingual. We are not. So we do need a national language. So English is important, Hindi is important, and maybe see, I'm all for translating, but you can't keep translating into 24 languages, because you can't get a person in some remote place saying it's my right that the latest should be available in my language, because even to do that you need somebody who can deliver that translation. So we'll tie ourselves up into circles. We do need some languages which are link languages, communication languages. We need Sanskrit, because without Sanskrit, the necklace of pearls that is Indian civilization will be scattered. This is what they wanted. You break that thread and the pearls are scattered. So you need some Sanskrit, and Sanskrit is a very inviting language. You don't have to do Vyakaran for 22 years or 12 years now. From the Hindi, the Tamil, the Telugu, whatever, Punjabi, Kashmiri, and we have so much apparatus. You can read a text. A well-educated person today can pick up the Bhagavad Gita, can see a translation, can see the parsing, but the moment you grapple with it in the original, something happens, which you can't get from translation. So this can be done. If, Israel adopted Hebrew, we can't do that quite because we're a small country. But, we can learn, our children can learn. It's not the end of the world. But as I said, if you have the notion, of a national education, then it goes completely contrary to the current forces. And every politician wants to name a college after himself or his grandfather or grandmother. They're getting land, they're creating assets. So this is what's going on. We have thousands of colleges. We have 30,000 colleges in India now, something like that. More than 1,000 universities, more than 40,000 colleges. But many of these cannot impart even, let alone knowing yourself, knowing your culture, transforming the world, consciousness revolution, you know, let alone all those fancy things, they cannot even teach the subject, which they're supposed to teach. This is the
Good,
sad
good,
truth. This is
good.
the sad truth.
Maybe a closing question, because the understanding the self is also, very important facet of Swamiji's message when it came to education. But given the fact that the last 1 year has been completely online education, where there has been a complete, disconnect between the teacher and the thought, while Swamiji in many of his writings has necessitated, the need for Guru Grahavasa. Now, of course, this is just maybe a small interim arrangement, but the way in which we are kind of celebrating this online education, I get a feeling that we are just intellectually paratrooping. Well, actually, we have to be foot soldiering and stay rooted to our a system of education. Do you agree with that?
Yes and no. You look, it's very important what you said. Vivekananda actually, trained under the direct tutelage and supervision of Sri Ramakrishna. So for that kind of, if you want to create those kinds of, personalities, leaders, and right now I'm reading about Swamiji and Nivedita and the Himalayan journey, and how Swamiji, I was going to say taught, trained, and treated Nivedita, very hard education. So that is absolutely a must. There's no substitute. Now, if I'm in New Indian Express, I want to spend time with Mr. Chawla. I'm telling you. I'm not interested in anything else because I'm not going to learn, sitting at a copy desk. I want to be in touch with someone who has lived through decades of transformation of Indian journalism. And if I'm in, Shastra University, I will identify, if I'm a young student and I'm speaking to younger students, I will identify the teachers who inspire me. I will keep taking their courses. I will try to be in their sanithyam. So there is no substitute. You're absolutely right. And the simple thing is the machine cannot produce the dhwani, you see, even when you want to give Guru Diksha, Guru Mantram, it's not done through a machine. Today we are outsourcing. You see, there's a death in my family, let's say I'm abroad. I pay somebody, I do an e-puja, and some Pandit is chanting somewhere, and all my work is done. That I mean, I don't know if Tarpana can be offered that way. I don't know. But I think no. I think you need the contact. But at the same time, this is a great opportunity. We have dematerialized the university, the brick and mortar university, the so-called, these Ivy Leagues, and even in India, versions of the Ivy Leagues, where entry is itself so difficult. You can't get inside. Now all the lectures are available online. At Indian Institute of Advanced Study, we were like this at Ivory Tower. So I went to a number of people. I just had a wonderful conversation with the consortium of consortium for educational communication, CEC, headed by Mr. Jagat Bhushan Nanda, JB Nanda, not JP, who is the BJP president, but his brother. Anyhow, we want to make all our content available, okay, through digital platforms, through direct to home, through Gyan, through Swayam, through all these new platforms on your TV channels. Now, what does this mean? The best speakers in India who have come here or who have joined us through webinar, instead of making content exclusive, we want to open it up. And this is also true of Harvard and Yale and Oxford. More and more content will be available online. And a person who's determined to educate themselves, they may be better educated without a certificate by following some of these lectures than someone who's going through an ordinary university. Now, this is when we have to scale it up. And I think NEP and other, wonderful initiatives of the government. Here, I'm unreservedly an admirer of some of these proposals where you can get a degree, you can fulfill curricular requirements by, watching these lectures on your TV. There are at least 30, 40 dedicated channels. So I think this is a very good practice because we must have lifelong learning. As I said, India is a knowledge society. Let us remove the barriers to knowledge. For me, digital opening up of educational sector is a wonderful democratization. So, to conclude, I feel we need both. We need excellence, uncompromising excellence, contact with unique teachers. We need good institutions. We need excellence once more. We need to depoliticize education. We need to nationalize the character, etc. At the same time, through these other mechanisms, we can open up more and more and more. And here, I think all of us have a role to play, because whether we are in the media, such as Mr. Chawla and Kaveri, whether we are in education in the private sector, whether we are in education in the government sector, we need to work together, and to make our best content available to everybody.
Thank you very much. It was really a pleasure to listen to you. And I look forward to a time where you can devise and teach a course on Hinduism online. And I think all of us will definitely sign up for it. Thank you very much, Makarand, Paranjape. Thank you very much, Dr. Vaidya. Thank you very much, Mr. Chawla.
Thank you.
We hope you really enjoyed that session. You can find the entire schedule of ThinkEdu 2021 on our website, eventexpress.com. You can watch the rest of the sessions on our YouTube channel, eventexpress.com, newindianexpress.com and edxlive.com. You can also check out our Facebook and Twitter handles. Thank you for watching. There are a lot of lessons that one can learn from our great epics. We have two experts discussing this today. One is Indic scholar and author Dushyant Sridhar. He has learned scriptures like Sri Bhashyam, Gita Bhashyam, Rahasya Travasraram and Bhagavad Vishayam. He has delivered many live discourses in multiple countries and in several regional television channels. The next speaker is scientist and author Subhash Kak. A Padma Shri recipient, he is the Regents Professor of Computer Science Department at the Oklahoma State University. They are going to talk to author and senior journalist Kaveri Bamzai.
So welcome both of you. It's such a pleasure to have you. I really want to begin by asking you both a somewhat personal question. What started you off on this journey to discovering ancient India, to discovering our ancient knowledge? Because very little in our education system as such prepares us for this kind of understanding. So Professor Kak, to you first, what started you off on this journey? You being a computer scientist especially.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on this program. Thank you, Kaveri. It's an old story. The mid-80s, I was working on AI, artificial intelligence. And that's when I remembered that my father, when I was a little kid, used to tell me about Panini's grammar,
Right.
which represented Sanskrit completely in 4,000 algebraic rules.
Right.
And now which scholars believe is equivalent to the most powerful programming language. Or most powerful computing device in its capacity. So this set me going. So I thought this didn't quite gel with the accounts of Indian science that one reads in books. So I decided to investigate on my own. And I went back through various layers of Sanskrit literature, going from the sutras to the Upanishads, the Aranyakas, the Brahmanas, and then the Vedic texts themselves. And I discovered an astronomy, I discovered a lot of stuff which had been lost for at least a couple of thousand years, on which I wrote many, many papers and books. And then it sort of opened the whole horizon to me. And what I realized that the last 80 years have been quite problematic in India. We are teaching India through the Western gaze to Indians. So, and it's sort of ironical that the elite still arrange for their children to learn about these things privately, but they don't want it to be a part of the curriculum. And it's as if they say, what's good for me is not good for thee. And so it's been an interesting struggle because there are those who deride this as if it's something regressive. It isn't. In the West as well, people are enormously attracted to all these ideas because ultimately the very heart of the Indian tradition is the mystery of consciousness. In fact, the Vedas are supposed to be Atma Vidya, which is the science of consciousness, which is the frontier of contemporary science as it is. So, in other words, it's great to be connected to the science and then the epics, because the epics encapsulate this wisdom in terms of stories in a fashion which young people and older people can relate to.
Right. Professor Kak, before I go to Dushyant Sridhar, I just want to ask you, someone told me recently what's happened with Indian science and Indian research is that, and Indian knowledge is that we've gone from practice to the lab, whereas the West goes from the lab to practice. So is that one of the reasons why you think that things like yogic consciousness, don't get enough sort of credit in the West?
Well, I think that's a much more complicated story because Indian universities, the ecosystem that we need for critical examination of thought, that doesn't exist to the degree it should. There are a lot of very outstanding people in India, in Indian universities, but by and large, there is a desire to be validated by the West, which is good, because we are all the same global village and we are all colleagues. It doesn't matter Indians or non-Indians, but for the reasons of the Western gaze, I think that's what's frozen us into a situation. We don't want to look into certain issues. For example, you'll be surprised. A few years ago, there were courses at Columbia University and other leading American universities on management through the Bhagavad Gita.
Right.
Now, I would imagine that such a thing will never be done in an Indian university.
Yeah, that's a pity, isn't it? We wait for the West to validate us before we ourselves use our own wisdom, isn't it? It often happens.
Absolutely, because it's still the Western gaze. We have to find our own spot on Earth, our own place on Earth. And even if we don't, if we are very shy, we'll be thrust on world stage because economically, India is already the third largest economy by purchasing power parity terms. And in absolute terms, in the next 20, 30 years, it's supposed to become number one. In the next 7 or 8 years, it'll be number two. So people will expect us, people all around the world, they'll expect us to take leadership in these matters. They would want our universities to be much stronger. They would want our independent researchers to stride forth on the world stage, as many of them are already doing, like our other guests, and that'll be a wonderful thing.
Right. Dushyant, this is, of course, my cue to come to you. What drew you to, to start on this journey? You also are, an engineer. You trained at BITS Pilani. You worked in the corporate sector for many years. So what drew you to it, and what is the kind of feedback that you get, especially from young audiences? I was reading recently that that your stories of Prahlad, the boy god, and Hiranyakashyap especially, they're very popular with young people. And yet, as Professor Kak said, they wouldn't be part of the curriculum. They would be taught privately, So there's that dichotomy. Talk a little about your own experience.
Kaveri, we are the family valuing civilization. So I have had the fortune of growing up under the tutelage and the love of my grandparents.
Right.
So since my childhood, at least in the 1990s, I used to see them sit religiously listening to a lot of lectures in the night. So it wasn't visual. So the very art of storytelling of all our scriptures, be it Ramayana and Mahabharata, gave me the opportunity of drawing a beautiful canvas in front of me. Say, for instance, Mahabharata, it has 14 times the number of characters in the 7-volume Harry Potter. So, and the multitude of characters, the variety of emotions. If we weren't a civilization, as per historians at the point in time of Mahabharata, this book couldn't have arrived. So we would have been a very, very advanced civilization of those days. So the very art of storytelling of all our scriptures drew me very close. Second, my grandfather was a retired employee from the State Bank of India. He was an astrologer too. So while in school, we used to study about full moon and new moon and how the telescope helps see. And living in Bangalore, we had this Jawaharlal Nehru Planetarium and all of that. On the other hand, he used to buy a 10 rupee book at the start of every Hindu calendar for 5 rupees from Srirangam, which is a small temple town in the southern part of Tamil Nadu. And he used to come and he used to tell when Amavasa will come and when Paurnima will come.
Right.
So he was not depending on a telescope. He will tell when the next Amavasya is based on that 5 rupee book. So if we have to come at a conclusion of when the full moon and the new moon is going to come, then see the amount of thought process which would have taken place in our civilization. So people were not bereft of the knowledge of the moon and the sun and the stars in those days. So these two aspects. And the third thing, every vacation generally comes in the month of April and May, and you know how terrible the summers can get.
Yeah.
But the coolest part of my summers was I was taken to a variety of temples in the south of India. And I was amazed looking at the architecture even as a school child, and the very fact that a person without the advanced knowledge of engineering couldn't have even touched a pillar of those temples draw me very close to the civilization. So despite having a full-fledged Western education going to the college, I have had great respect for our ancient subjects as well. So it's never to pull down one thought process over the other. I thought we could get the best of both worlds. And at one point in time, I just thought of calling my corporate career quits and came here. I don't have any disrespect towards the modern education. It follows a certain procedure. But I'm very, very proud of coming in a civilization that had the advanced techniques of medicine, engineering, grammar, vocabulary, simple things, Kaveri. But I'm amazed at our civilization. That amazement is still there every day, every minute. But I'm still a primitive mortal before this huge university of Sanatana Dharma.
I believe you study between 10 and 2, 10 at night and 2 in the morning every day. You study and you sort of learn afresh every day. Is that true?
Yeah, that's even true. Now that I have a 3-year-old daughter, that's the only peaceful time that I get.
Right. So you're constantly learning, you're constantly seeking, you're constantly researching. What is it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What are the new things that you've learned of late which excite you?
See, for instance, Srimad Ramayanam, or how generally it is called Ramayana, has been the most important and the first of the works that we generally take and research and delineate upon. Yeah. So I've been doing that for the last 10 years. Now, every time I take Ramayana and compare it with the 7 commentaries of the commentators, the very ancient ones, now I have understood that whatever I have known of Ramayana is very, very little. So every night, every minute when I read through Ramayana, it gives me that feeling that what have I been studying the same book for the last 9 years, I have not come across this point. Why did I miss it?
Right.
So be it Ramayana or Sri Mahabharatam, every shloka has been delineated by the commentator so beautifully that you always have the feeling that you should go back to the book again. So see, generally that doesn't happen with books, Kaveri.
Right.
Let's take Enid Blyton or things.
Right.
Suppose we have a series, you take one book, you read, you wouldn't want to read that novel again. That's very, and here, every time we read Ramayana, the same set of 24,000 verses with that 7 commentaries, it gives you a very, very different dimension. I can't tell you how beautiful it is. So that is one aspect. The second thing is, at the same time, I have a huge respect for the findings of historians based on evidences. So we must learn to respect that as well. So when I compare how let's take the iconography of Durvasa, how it has been projected to the temples, you'll be amazed of even the sculptors who may have had to had degrees in those days to sculpt. Because if they have to be very specific about the iconography, it is the case. I'll just give you one small finding, it may be interesting. Generally, when we portray Rama, Sita and Lakshmana going in the forest on the exile, we say that Rama was being very simple. He had to relinquish his kingdom, the wealth. So all his ornaments were seized. So he went like a hermit. Similarly, we showcase Sita also in the hermit dress. We showcase her of having relinquished all the wealth. Not so. She wanted to, but in Valmiki Ramayana, Dasharatha, the father-in-law, tells, my daughter-in-law shouldn't suffer just because my son is suffering. She should have all the riches wherever she goes. That is why the commentators have said, the moment she left Ayodhya for all the 14 years, she wore silk, Chinam Shukaihi, and she was wearing all jewelry. So Lakshmana carried the clothes and the jewelry for Sita for all the 14 years. This is never projected in our visual canvas.
Never.
So this is proven by commentators. Right. So generally filmmakers may not take the time or have the time to research. Right. But that was amazing for me. So Sita is wearing silk and jewelry throughout her forest life. Right. So, such elements make you wonder how much of detailing has gone into our scriptures.
Right. Also, I think the changing iconography of Lord Ram as well. Over the years, he's become more martial. Is there enough evidence in the text to show that?
He was dark, and it is mentioned very clearly that he was a mix of the dark green, dark blue, and gray hue. So he was not one color. He was a mix of all the colors. Right. One. And second thing, throughout his 14 years of exile, he is said to have never shaved. He never had a shaven face. Right. So he had a huge jata and he had a huge beard, is what Srimad Ramayanam tells, and so is the iconography. So we can never see Arun Govil or N.T. Ramarao in the south had the Gillette shaven face, but he had a long beard. Right. And so, if we project that today, people may think we are doing a mistake. Yeah. That's the case today. But truly, he had a huge beard, huge beard. That's so the body, yes, and he was of 8 feet, Kaveri. Oh. As per Sundarakandam, Sita asks Hanuman, tell me the height of Rama, because you say you're a messenger of Rama. He says very clearly numbers 2 into 4, 8 feet. Wow. Was his height.
Right. Professor Kak, all this is so fascinating, isn't it? But when you, present evidence like this to the world, when you talk about, the science evident in our ancient texts, do you see a degree of skepticism not only in the West but also in India?
Not at all. This is all peer-reviewed Western journals, right, as well as Indian journals. Right. The science that I'm talking about is not something which is far out, right, which is in the fringes. I'm talking about researches or journal articles published by a variety of people, both Westerners and Indians, right, in peer-reviewed journals. So I'm talking of impeccable science. And in India as well. In fact, one of the most prestigious journals in this field is a journal published by Indian National Science Academy in Delhi called the Indian Journal of History of Science. And so anybody can go and look at that information. My own work has appeared in the Royal Astronomical Society in American journals, whole series. I suppose, but to come back to the really heart of your question, there are some people in India who are skeptical, and they're skeptical because they haven't seen the evidence and they haven't seen it in the textbooks.
Yes.
So if you don't know the evidence, then it is natural, if you are coming in from a background where you have been told that there was no such science in India, because these are one of the two things that the British did. The image of India that the Indian elite have embraced is the image that, first of all, India didn't have any science, so we must depend on Westerners to guide us. And number two, that India also didn't have any true history. India was always a struggle between various castes and groups.
Right.
So what the British did was that we didn't have any agency, right? And that's of course not true at all. The whole idea of frozen castes is false, as new scholarship. Again, it's not just Indian scholars. Some of the most prominent Western scholars have been writing on how the idea of the rigid caste as we see it now was created only about 1901 census, when different jatis who didn't quite know which varna they belonged to, because every jati thought it was the best, which is the way it should be. And of course, the economic situation of a community can go up and down based on different times that we live in. But the English forced, they said, this jati belongs to this varna, this jati belongs to this varna. Now, my own take on all of this is that every human being has the same purush within. This is what the Upanishads, this is what the Veda says. And since in the Purusha Sukta, it's said that out of the head of the Purusha came the Brahmin, out of the arms came the Rajanya, and so on. Therefore, each human being, no matter what jati they come from, no matter what background they come from, has all the four varnas in them. And in different roles in our lives, at different moments in our lives, we are sometimes more concerned about general understanding, or in taking charge, which is what the Kshatriya's role would be, or preservation or service. So all of us are that, but somehow, and this is not just the Westerner who has accepted or adopted or embraced these categories, but as I said, a lot of Indians have come to believe that this is how it has always been. And this is why a lot of the scholarship that comes out of Indian universities falls by the wayside, because they are projecting their current understanding to the past. The past was not quite the way as it is now. And we see that in all the wonderful temples that we have, all the various shastras, the Sthapatya Veda and so on, the great architecture, unparalleled, the beauty of Indian architecture. And coming back to the epics and the knowledge within, let me just mention one small point. The big frontier of modern science is, where does consciousness come from?
Yeah.
Because if we're all machines, why isn't a computer conscious while we human beings, our brain machine is conscious? Now, and if everything is by natural law, how do we have freedom? Now, all this was debated or discussed or described thousands of years ago in India. And in Vedanta, there is an idea called drishti srishti, that by drishti, the laws are not to be suspended. By drishti, divinity creates. And this is something which has been demonstrated. It's a part of modern science, quantum mechanics. And a very great Indian physicist who was a good friend of mine, George Sudarshan, in the 1970s, created a theory which is called the quantum Zeno effect, where it can be shown that just by observation, you can control a physical system. So just imagine, very subtle thought in India, which will still be of significance to science. So it's not just for antiquarian interest, not just for literary interest. And that is enormous. Mahabharata is the biggest text that there is, or Ramayana, or Yoga Vasishta, which incidentally was created in Kashmir, so we can smile at that. So these are amazing texts. But apart from literature, we have sciences, which would be relevant in the coming decades. So it'll only be good that we should not just say it's religion. It is science. Shastras of our tradition are science, and they should be taught to everybody.
Right. In fact, just an additional point to this, Professor Kark, while the world is talking about artificial intelligence and the challenges of artificial intelligence, and we're talking about China having taken a 10-year leap ahead of us, and, we are, I suppose, justifiably worried. What is there in our consciousness, in our study of consciousness, that can actually enable us to leapfrog, in a sense, ahead of the world, as it were, currently? Is it possible?
Of course. Indians are the most successful community in the United States, where there is level playing field. They are the wealthiest, as you know. They are powerhouse on the West Coast in all high technology companies. So why? Because not necessarily that they are smarter. There are smart people in all cultures. We are as good as anybody, but our culture gives us certain strengths, and that's where the epics come in. It gives us certain strengths. It gives us Atma Vishwas. It gives us self-confidence, and it also provides us a certain kind of psychological and emotional security, which is what you need, an anchor, in order to, stride out and do whatever needs to be done. Now, if India is a bit behind China, I won't say that China is 10 years ahead. The reason why Chinese have done very well in the last 10, 20 years and Indians haven't done that well is because India adopted the wrong model for bringing in computers to India. They brought in computers by saying that, or IT, by saying that we will be the back office. And that is the East India Company, Fort St. George model. The English do everything, and the back office, in the dark rooms, there are the Indians who are updating the ledgers. While what the Chinese did, or the Japanese or the Koreans have done, they have focused on products. Once you have products, then you occupy a certain space, which allows us to do further innovation. So I think what India needs, India doesn't need any difference in our mental attitude to the world, but it needs a change in our science and technology policy. And not everything can be done by the government. I think what we need is for the Prime Minister to bring together the leading business people in India and tell them, please do such and such stuff, because the government cannot do these things. Products cannot be made by the government.
They need collaboration with the government and with private-public partnerships, perhaps.
No, or just the private sector. And of course, there's always underlying all such enterprises a certain collaboration. For example, one reason Google is so powerful across the world is because Google gets a lot of subsidies or hidden support from Department of Defense in the US.
Right.
So if we had great products, and there is some attempt to produce some of these products, if we had great products, clearly the government of India, Indian armed forces, defense, and many other sectors would also use it, and there would be a subsidy, indirect subsidy.
You're part of the Prime Minister's council, if I'm not mistaken. Is such a thing happening?
Well, I can't talk about
without giving too much away. Yes.
Yeah, but I must say, from what I can see clearly, in the council, in the Prime Minister's Council, we do discuss all of these questions, and the council looks at the very large initiatives that we need in the field of science and technology, and there's some wonderful things that are being done. For example, genetics or underwater exploration or this and that. But but I think in addition to whatever the Prime Minister's Council or the government might do, I think a lot of the initiatives should come from the private sector.
Right.
And they might need assistance, and they should certainly seek that. But first of all, you have to dream. You cannot create things without a vision. And I think the problem with India for the last 25 years was that the vision was wrong. The vision was too constricted. It was coming from a place of fear, that we can only work for somebody else. Let somebody else give us some work to do and we'll do it. And we need a bold vision. We can do things. We can provide AI or new machines or automation for the entire world. We shouldn't be doing it just for India. We should be doing it for the entire world. And it is possible. Indians are some of the smartest people in the world. And, we see it all across in every corner of the globe right now. And then we also have something more. We have this amazing wisdom, yoga. You go to any corner of the world, people want to know who they are. And that's what yoga is all about. Even in countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, people want to do it. Everybody wants to know the truth. But we have to go out and explain it to them.
Right. Dushyant, of course, you're doing it in spades. You're explaining to people who they are. You're going back to ancient wisdom and finding examples from there and explaining, the way of life to youngsters, especially. Do you find that the next generation could be perhaps better equipped to deal with these challenges of AI and, these algorithms which know us better than we know ourselves?
Yes, we do, Kaveri. In the last 10 years, the audience which I have analyzed myself and through the analytics which YouTube throws, I see that there is a good rise in the lesser than 45 years of age population which listens to lectures. Listening is one part. And I receive quite a lot of mails every day from students who are actually doing artificial intelligence and studying nanotechnology, stating that could this in Ramayana have relations to artificial intelligence? Could this in Mahabharata have a relationship? So more than checking if there is a relationship, the point is there is a thought in the students that could this be related to. So the very thought process itself is very, very refreshing and very good. This is on one side, Kaveri, but when talking about students and children, I feel in the curriculum itself, without making it sound, because today, if something from the Ramayana or Sri Mahabharata or the Bhagavad Gita is brought into the school syllabus, we will be filled with newspaper pages, because the reason is the world views the word religion from the Western point of view. So the very thought of religion in the West is very not inclusive. Whereas Sanatana Dharma largely relies itself on the universality. So that universality point of religion is never taken from the West. So the moment we say that there are certain aspects that we are going to bring from Ramayana and Mahabharata, there will be a lot of controversy in it. But trust me, Kaveri, if they are brought into the school syllabus without disturbing the current education system, it will give in a lot of ideas for the students. Just for example, the tree is called by a variety of names in Sanskritam. But there is an interesting word called as Padapa. It's called Padapa. Why? Padena pibati iti Padapa. The one that drinks through its roots is called as Padapa. So the body, B-O-D-Y, the body is indicated by a variety of names. But look at the variety. If the body keeps reducing in size, it's called Shariram. Shiryate iti Shariram, that which reduces. That which keeps increasing is called Deham. So in those days, you didn't need to bring sarcasm by or body shaming through the line. So if you say and you call a person, oh, that's Deham, that means the person is put on weight. So the words themselves have been so very well designed to bring in emotions as well. So right from that till the very aspect of Agnihotra, the fire ritual, which a married householder performs with the aid of his wife has 3 Vedikas, 3 positions where the fire is kept. So one is semicircle, one is circle, and the third Vedika, the Agni Kunda, is in the form of a square.
Right.
So Aryabhatta very beautifully brings it from the concept of Mahabharata and states that how will I design a square, a circular Vedika as the same area as that of a square. Then he brings on to the very fact of Chaturadhika Shatam Ashtagunam, 4 over 100 multiplied with 8. Chaturadhika Shatam Ashtagunam, because in Sanskrit, guna means multiplication as well. So when you multiply and add it to 62,000, Dvasashti Sahasranam, 62,000, and divide it by Dva Ayutascha, divided by 20,000. Whatever value you get, if you divide and multiply and then divide, you'll get it as 3.1416, which is the pi value.
Right.
So he says, use this pi value 22 by 7 to get the area of the circle. See, look at the ritual called Agni Hotra. And in the due course of very casually explaining, he brings out the concept of pi.
Right.
For us, in the university stage, we will have one patent, one research paper to speak about pi, and he casually brings it in the conversation. You know, such points, when induced very interestingly and very engagingly in the school syllabus, I don't think we will have a lot of people mocking and questioning the ancient sciences that we have had in the future generations. Today, there is this mocking. Oh, did he do that? Did you say that he knew about pi? So we all believe in the concept of written papers. Our system has been very oral. So we have been a very oral civilization. So it's all what we learn by hearing. So when a lot of things have not been documented the way the West wants it, it doesn't mean that science didn't exist. It doesn't exist in the format in which you want. So probably today, as Indian citizens and as people who are very proud of the civilization, probably we should get into documenting all of that the way the West wants it, not to impress upon the West, to tell the West to correct the notion that they have about the country.
Right. But also this means a complete retraining of the teachers as well. It's not just the students, but also those who teach.
Yeah, true. See, my mother has been a teacher in a school for the last 30 years. So imagine we have a multitude of teachers across the private, the international schools, the boarding schools, and the government schools across cities and towns and villages. So that's going to be a huge process. But given that we are beneficiaries of the current technology, Kaveri, I don't think like 30 years before, there was no YouTube, there was no training. Suppose the same pandemic had happened 30 years before, I think there would be no online classes.
Of course.
So 1 year would have gone. Today, we have classes happening online. So when we have made use of technology, even during the times of pandemic, now that we are in the recovery phase, I think training teachers also through technology is not impossible. So we are at that stage now. We can take the aid of technology and train them. It will be a painstaking process, and that's not going to happen in a year. That's going to happen in a few years. But I think the very foundation for that process has to be laid as early as possible.
Right. Professor Kak, do you see evidence of it in the new education policy that we have in India currently, which actually does talk about all this, which talks about experiential learning, which talks about looking at our ancient knowledge? Do you see that happening seriously?
I'm not very knowledgeable about the details of NEP, but you're right. You know, there will be more focus on learning or teaching in mother language, for example, mother tongue.
Right.
And personally, I think that's a very important factor, and maybe that is one factor which has made us fall behind China. India is the only major economy in the world where sciences are not taught in the mother tongue. And in particular, for computer programming, one has to learn English before one can learn computer programming in India, while in China, Korea, Vietnam, or Hungary, or in Israel, people learn programming through their mother tongue. It's the same program. They still write, they use the same symbols, but they don't have to learn the English language. I think what has happened in India is that there's become a kind of a divide. There is the divide, the city versus the countryside. Countryside meaning people who are using their language, where people are much more proficient in Indian languages. Now, fortunately, there are some leaders, business leaders in India who are saying that this is all nonsense. And they're saying that you don't even have to have a formal college degree to do computer programming, for example, because what is computer programming? These are only procedures. You do procedures. Everybody learns to use a smartphone.
Yeah.
And now the programming is a bit goes beyond that. You have to have a certain discipline. So to come back to NEP, yes, that will make a great deal of difference. Now, one important and perhaps not such a big or difficult initiative is to introduce one course in school on history of Indian science,
Yeah.
and a course in college, all impeccable, based on impeccable work which scholars all around the world accept.
Right.
And it's not it that Indian sciences were all oral, or they were not formally written down. In fact, they were siddhantas, they were texts, they were formal books which can be dated, quite like books elsewhere in the world, quite like, let's say, Greek books or books in Europe. So we have, and scholars know all of this stuff, so you can put together a course, and I believe such a course is being designed or created in India by scholars, and that'll be perfectly
that's
acceptable
wonderful.
to everybody.
Yeah.
There should
I
not
think-
be any controversy on that.
I think it should be taught to everybody.
Absolutely. And also, Kaveri, there's another reason why such a course should be taught.
Yeah.
There are people in India who make claims which are so far out that they are ridiculed for one thing, and all of Indian culture gets ridiculed in the process.
Right.
If you suddenly say that 3,000 years ago we had flying planes or this or that, now you can look at all of that as metaphors or imagination or possibilities that the rishi or the kavi thought up, but you're not to take that literal as literal truth. If you had a course where good information was present, if you have nothing, then bad information can take can take control of that space. We need good information to drive out what is not accurate and correct. And that'll be good for everybody. It'll be good for all of us, not just for the prosperous Indians who can hire a tutor to teach their children all the good stuff, but for everybody in India. And then all this unfortunate divide that we have in India right now, that there are these skeptics who think that this is all made up, and that'll go away. It's not made up. It's like, Europe had a glorious civilization, so had we. Let's just embrace it and then move on and then deal with the problems of the future, because ultimately the problems that are important for everybody, for us as members of society, are problems of the future and present. So let's just not fight over the past. Let's embrace whatever is impeccable and accepted by scholars around the world, and then move on. This is what I say.
And I hope such a course is taught by you. Just the last points from both of you. One quick point from both of you. One thing that you'd like to see happening, perhaps in the education system, perhaps in the ecosystem in India, which would really make us appreciate our ancient knowledge, and also not appreciate it and understand it, and at least begin to understand it. Dushyant, you, and then Professor Pap.
So one thing that in the education system in the year and in the years to come should bring across all the metros and cities without the country and the city divide is to somehow engagingly bring Sanskritam as a language in the curriculum. though there could
Not
be
the way it is currently.
Yeah, not the way it is currently. At least Sanskrit was still there in schools and colleges for the last 50 years, but it was as if it was a third language or a second language, and it was meant for scoring, and you could write the answers in English and you can still score. Not that way. See, all our agamas, be it Srimad Ramayanam, Sri Mahabharatam, or Arya Bhatiyam, all these books that we speak of, right from Siddhanta Kaumudi to all of this largely Kaveri. So if I have to appreciate the values and the science and the other sciences that we had in our ancient civilization, and I again go back to an English translation, so I'm still not serving the purpose because it's after all a language of 26 letters. English is. So the permutation and combinations of the words that you get is still going to be limited, whereas this has 256 characters, Sanskritam. So look at the amount of words that we have. So it's very, very important that we imbibe the language as a part of our curriculum, so that you don't need another person to explain the verse of Ramayana, because it will be like reading the English newspaper. So the Ramayana and Mahabharata, they won't be misinterpreted. They won't be exaggerations. You know what will be the upama, like how Subhashji said, you will know what is the simile there, what is the metaphor. So all that knowledge will come to you when you know the language well. So imbibing Sanskrit as an engaging language during the school days across metros and villages without any distinction. Of course, it needs a lot of training on the part of the teachers as well. So if that's going to happen, I feel the life or probably our process to appreciating ancient knowledge will become all the more easier. Without Sanskritam, without that knowledge, it's going to be that tough.
Yeah, I agree. Professor Kak, closing word?
Well, I agree. Making it easier for young people and older people to learn Sanskrit. And that's where we can use technology. You know, there is something that has changed, which was much more difficult to do, say 20 or 30 years ago, where the school or college curriculum was literally the only place where you got connected to the past or to science or technology, to the present and everything else. Now you have the social media, you have the internet, you have technology, which make it so much easier. And in fact, some of the thinkers in the educational field in the West are saying that the brick and mortar university may be a thing of the past, because it's much too expensive to teach physically in a physical location at a university. If we are going to be using IT, information technology, to communicate, perhaps as an addition to what people learn from a guru or from a instructor at school, what I would want leaders in India, in the government or in the business world to think is, how do we harness this technology so that we become global leaders in using this technology for sending out education, and then this knowledge is of interest not just to Indians, it's of interest to everybody. How can we therefore create a future university kind of a setting through IT, which would make its impact across the world?
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Professor Kak. Thank you so much, Dushyant Srijati. It was a fascinating conversation. I hope we have one such again soon. Thank you. Thank you for being with the New Indian Express. Thank you.
Namaskaram.
Namaskar.
We hope you really enjoyed that session. You can find the entire schedule of ThinkEdu 2021 on our website eventexpress.com. You can watch the rest of the sessions on our YouTube channel, eventexpress.com, newindianexpress.com and edxlive.com. You can also check out our Facebook and Twitter handles. Thank you for watching.